Chapter 186. That morning, when Lu Chen walked out of his wooden hut with a yawn, he saw a man standing with his hands behind his back on the quiet Fian terrace, not far from his wooden hut. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s. He had a refined bearing and a calm expression. Perhaps it was because of his age, there were already some stars on his temples, but it could still be seen that he was still in the prime of his life. The man stood there, looking at the sea of clouds beyond the cliff. Then, he turned around and saw Lu Chen. He smiled calmly and quietly, nodding at Lu Chen and saying, "Hello." "Yes, hello. May I ask who you are, senior?" Lu Chen tried to recall, but he had no impression of this person before, so he asked politely. The man walked toward him and stopped a few feet away from Lu Chen. He wasn't too close to make it awkward, but he wasn't too far away to make it seem rude. He looked Lu Chen up and down, then nodded and said with a smile, "You must be Lu Chen." I am Lu Chen. Do you know me, senior?" Lu Chen was a little surprised. The man smiled and said, "Oh, I don't think we've met before. Let me introduce myself. My surname is Su, and my name is Tianhe." Su Tianhe. Lu Chen repeated the name in his heart. Suddenly, his expression changed. He looked at the man's face again and found him familiar. There were some similarities between him and Su Qingjun. He was surprised and said, "Could you be from the Su family?" Su Tianhe smiled and nodded, "I can be considered the head of the Su family, and also Qingjun's father." Lu Chen was speechless. He didn't expect the head of the Su family to come to the Fian terrace alone so early in the morning. But judging from Su Tianhe's extraordinary bearing, he was completely different from the young people in his family. At this moment, Su Tianhe's gaze swept over Lu Chen's face. After a while, he sighed and said, "Brother Lu, I didn't teach my son well and wasn't strict enough with my subordinates, causing you to suffer. This is all the fault of the Su family. I apologize in advance." After saying that, he solemnly cupped his hands and bowed to Lu Chen. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and a strange light flashed in his eyes, but he quickly stepped aside and said, "Senior, please don't do this. I don't deserve it." Su Tianhe smiled at Lu Chen and said, "Brother Lu is reasonable and an outstanding person. I believe you are also a broad-minded person." As he said that, he stepped forward and stuffed a cloth bag into Lu Chen's hand, saying, "There are some rare spiritual materials in this bag. They are probably worth thousands of spiritual stones. It's just a small token of my appreciation, but it can't make up for the guilt in my heart. Please accept it, Brother Lu. For the sake of my old face, please don't hold a grudge against our Su clan." As he said that, he looked at Lu Chen with a sincere expression. Lu Chen's face also showed some fear and nodded, saying, "Senior Su, you are too polite. How can I accept this?" As he said those polite words, Lu Chen was about to push the cloth bag out, but his fingers tightened on the cloth bag. Su Tianhe glanced at the cloth bag and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He was determined to give it to Lu Chen. The two pushed for a while, but in the end, Lu Chen reluctantly accepted it and thanked Su Tianhe with a happy face. After joking for a while, Su Tianhe and Lu Chen seemed to be chatting very congenially. Su Tianhe glanced at the cave on the other side and turned to Lu Chen, saying, "Brother Lu, I think it's getting late. Can you help me call Qingjun and ask her to come out and meet me?" Lu Chen was slightly surprised and said, "Senior, you and she are father and daughter. Can't you just go and call her directly?" Su Tianhe sighed and said, "Brother Lu, you don't know. I was not at home a while ago. I heard that Qingjun came back and quarreled with my wife and a few brothers. After that, we didn't contact each other for a few days. When I came back and heard about this, I immediately reprimanded them and then came up the mountain." Speaking up to here, he paused for a moment and then said sincerely, "In fact, what you said just now is also reasonable. Qingjun and I are father and daughter. Everything can naturally be discussed. But I'm afraid that she is still angry and unwilling to see me. So, I'll have to trouble Brother Lu." Lu Chen nodded and said, So that's how it is. Alright then, I'll help you call her. However, I have to warn you first that I don't dare to guarantee that she'll come out to see you herself. Su Tianhe laughed and looked relaxed, but there seemed to be a glimmer of light flashing in the depths of his eyes. He said with a smile, "Ha, it seems that Brother Lu really understands Qing Jun. Do you know that it's a little difficult to call her this morning?" Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then immediately shook his head and said with a smile, "No, no, no. Senior Su, you misunderstand. How would I know? I'm just afraid that a lowly odd-job disciple like me might not pay attention to young lady Su even if I call her. Alright, wait a moment, I'll go call her for you." As he said this, he turned around and walked towards the stone door of the cave residence. The morning sun sprinkled down from the sky and shone on the faces of the two men. When Lu Chen turned his back to Su Tianhe, the smiles on their faces disappeared at the same time. The man's gaze was calm and somewhat cold, deep as the sea. Lu Chen stood in front of the stone door of the cave residence and began to loudly knock on the door. Occasionally, he and Su Tianhe would look back and smile at each other and nod slightly. But after a long time, the stone door still didn't move. It seemed that Su Qingjun had no intention of coming out. Lu Chen touched his chest. There was still a yellow talisman stone lying there. It was the heart-burning talisman that Su Qingjun gave him when he planted the eagle fruit tree. She didn't take it back later on. So these days, if he wanted to find Su Qingjun, he wouldn't knock on the door like this. But now he had no intention of using the heart-burning talisman. After calling for a while, he turned back to look at Su Tianhe and said somewhat helplessly, "Senior, you see." Su Tianhe nodded and pondered for a moment before saying to Lu Chen, "In that case, it's not good for me to stay here for a long time. Moreover, I do have some things to do in the city below the mountain, so I can only leave first. Brother Lu, when you see Qingjun, please help me tell her that I've come to see her. We're all family, so there's nothing that can't be said. Ask her to come down the mountain to see me when she has time." Lu Chen responded and said, "Senior, rest assured, I will definitely pass on the message." Su Tianhe smiled and cupped his hands, then turned around and left. From the beginning to the end, he was elegant and approachable, completely different from the other Su family members that Lu Chen had seen before. He was a person that made it difficult for people not to have a good impression of him. Lu Chen's brows furrowed slightly as he watched his figure gradually disappear into the distance. As usual, Su Qingjun waited until the evening of this day before she slowly walked out of the cave residence and strolled around the Fian Terrace. Lu Chen saw her and told Su Qingjun about Su Tianhe's visit during the day. After listening, Su Qingjun was silent. The expression on her face looked a little complicated, faintly a little annoyed, but also a little guilty and ashamed. Lu Chen saw the change in her expression and did not say much. He just truthfully repeated Su Tianhe's words to her and then walked away. In that evening, Su Qingjun stood on the edge of the cliff and looked at the sea of clouds for a long time. The position where she stood was exactly where Su Tianhe stood during the day. "I heard that the most difficult thing to give up in this world is the affection between parents and children." Lu Chen said to old Ma with emotion, "Unfortunately, I have never felt this feeling since I was a child. I don't know if it's so deep and hard to give up." Old Ma smiled and said, "Who said it isn't? But I didn't expect that you would tell that old man Su's words so honestly. I thought you would at least do something to it." "Nonsense, I'm not that kind of person," Lu Chen said. "Believe me, you are," Old Ma said. He then lowered his head and dodged a cup that Lu Chen threw at him. Then, he said with a smile, "So, as a result of this message, Su Qingjun went down the mountain and went home today?" Lu Chen nodded and said, "She has been a filial daughter of a noble family for 20 years. Her parents are still alive. How can she really break up with them? Moreover, don't underestimate Su Tianhe. I think he is very shrewd and not easy to deal with. He is much better than his useless nephews." Old Ma said with a and said, "Yes, the Su family has been thriving these years, and Su Tianhe has contributed a lot. Lu Chen did not talk about this. They sat for a while, and Lu Chen suddenly said, "How many days until the next full moon night?" Old Ma was startled and said, "Why do you ask this?" He said with a frown for a moment and then said, 19 days. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, "Can the damn Baldy come back before that day?" Old Ma's eyes narrowed and his face suddenly became serious. He stared at Lu Chen and said in a low voice, "What's going on? Could it be that the spy has made a move?" Lu Chen hesitated and said, "I can't be completely sure." As he spoke, he told Old Ma about the mysterious symbol he found in the forest that day and what he understood from it. "In the end," he said, "whether the traitor will appear that day or not, and whether he will meet me, I still can't say for sure." Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "I will immediately report this to Milord, and then you come back in 3 days. How about it?" Lu Chen nodded and said, "Okay." Old Ma still showed a trace of joy on his face and said, "If we can find the spy so smoothly, we will be relieved." Lu Chen smiled and said, "What's wrong? Could it be that you originally wanted to search here for more than 10 years? Old Ma thought for a moment and said with a smile, "I don't need more than 10 years, but I really thought that it might take at least a few years." The two smiled at each other. After a moment, Lu Chen seemed to ask him casually, "Oh yes, you are quite knowledgeable. Have you heard of a strange insect with 3 green eyes, shaped like a small snake that devours flesh and blood?" Chapter 187. Old Ma was stunned for a moment and said, "What is it? Tell me in detail." Lu Chen told Old Ma about the appearance of the strange 3-eyed insect he saw last night in detail, but ignored the short but thrilling and extremely dangerous fight. Old Ma also frowned after hearing this. After pondering for a while, he shook his head and said, "I have never heard of such a strange and ferocious creature in this world before." "Well, I will help you check it later." Lu Chen knew that besides being well informed, Old Ma also had all kinds of connections. For so many years, he had no confidence in Old Ma, but his confidence in this aspect had never wavered. He nodded and said, "Okay." Old Ma pondered for a moment, and suddenly showed a trace of doubt on his face. He looked at Lu Chen and said, "Strange. This kind of monster is so cruel, and it must have killed many people. How could it appear in a place like Kunlun Mountain?" Lu Chen also nodded and said, "Yes, I also thought of this last night, but I also couldn't figure it out. And I've been on the mountain for so long, but I've never heard of anyone talking about this kind of monster before. Even earlier, there was no news about it. It should have just appeared suddenly." Old Ma's face suddenly darkened, and he lowered his voice and said softly, "Is it really so coincidental? Could it be that someone has their eyes on you?" Lu Chen also fell silent. After a moment, he said, "It shouldn't be. At present, the Su family was the only one who was unhappy with me. However, with Su Qingjun around, they wouldn't dare to act recklessly. Not to mention that Su Tianhe had personally come to the Flying Goose Terrace once. It was obvious that he wanted to ease the relationship between father and daughter. At this critical moment, they won't act recklessly." Old Ma nodded slowly and said, "What you said makes sense, but I always feel that there may be some undercurrent surging in Kunlun Mountain recently. You should be careful." Lu Chen grunted in acknowledgement, then glanced at him and said, "What do you mean by undercurrents? Explain it clearly. Could it be that you've heard some rumors recently?" Old Ma hesitated for a moment and said, "I did hear some news before. It said that there is someone in the Kunlun party, well, at the level of Immortal Yuanying, who is dissatisfied with the current leader, Immortal Idol Month." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows, and his expression suddenly became serious. He said softly, "Really?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Most likely true." Lu Chen did not ask Old Ma where this news came from. Years of friendship and getting along with each other had long made him understand the propriety of this matter. Moreover, he also believed that since Old Ma dared to tell him this news, it was most likely confirmed. He pondered for a moment and suddenly laughed, but his voice was still low. He said, questioning the current leader, Immortal Idol Month, and there is a perfected cultivator of deity transformation above him. Which immortal Yuanying is so bold to do so? Will there be any good consequences in the future? Logically speaking, it shouldn't be. Which big shot in that realm is simple? Each of them should be as cunning as a fox. Old Ma smiled and said, logically speaking, maybe so. Lu Chen looked at him, and his eyes suddenly lit up. A trace of a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said, that is to say, there must be something unreasonable in this. Let me think, all the principles in this world can only be justified if there is a foundation. But on Kunlun Mountain, those who can face Immortal Idol Month, including that Hakushin Jinkuan, are all qualified to be unreasonable. Those Yuanying Zenrens are not enough. Old Ma smiled and said nothing. Lu Chen shook his head and sighed. He said, damn Baldy, can't hold it in anymore. Old Ma shrugged and said, I think it's not that he can't hold it in anymore. It's just that most of the adults are in Zhengxianmeng now, and few are in the sect. Hakushin Jinkuan Mountain is the strongest on Kunlun Mountain. He probably needs to find a few opportunities to make a statement and show his existence. Lu Chen nodded and said, that makes sense. No wonder those Yuanying Zenrens dare to say such strange things. They have a backer behind them. Are those two from Baichao Tang's sect who are talking? Old Ma said, I heard that there are 3 or 4 of them, but the loudest ones should be Qiandang and Mingzhu Zhenren. And they do have a good reason to do so. After all, this time their excuse is related to Baichao Tang's sect. Lu Chen was stunned. He said, what's their excuse? Old Ma smiled and said, last time, a demon from the devil cult assassinated a servant disciple of Kunlun party. After many days of investigation, there was still no news. Naturally, Baichao Tang's sect will complain. I think even Jinren Idol Month can't say anything about it. Lu Chen was silent for a moment. He said, good move. On this day, both Su Qingjun and Lu Chen went down the mountain. Flying Goose Terrace was deserted. Except for the cave residence with the closed stone door, there was only a lonely wooden house with a black dog inside. Atsu seemed to be completely used to living in Flying Goose Terrace. Every day after waking up, it would walk around Flying Goose Terrace like a king inspecting his territory. From time to time, it would find a corner or a tree root to pee. Originally, it would run to the cave residence's stone door to do this, but under Su Qingjuan's strong protest and Lu Chen's scolding, Atsu cleverly avoided that area. But sometimes, when it looked at the stone wall, there was still a hint of regret in its one eye. Flying Goose Terrace was a secluded place. Usually, people rarely came here. There were no fierce beasts in the forest, but there were many birds. Usually, the birds' clear and melodious chirping added a bit of fairy-like atmosphere to the place. After Atsu patrolled around, it walked to the cliff and lay on the ground, staring blankly at the sea of clouds in the distance. In the past, whenever it was free during the day, Atsu would not stay alone like this. It would often run out into the forest to play, cross mountains and rivers, and run to its heart's content. At that time, it even liked to go to the strange Dog Head Mountain to look for the giant oxen and see the layers of strange beasts on the mountain. Those days seemed to be just yesterday. Back then, Atsu was happy and full of energy every day. But now, it was different. Atsu no longer looked for oxen, and it no longer went to the Dog Head Mountain. It even rarely entered the forest. Even if it ran into the forest, it would at most stay near Flying Goose Terrace. It would not go any further. All these changes stemmed from that heart-wrenching and cruel tyranny. It was so badly injured that it almost lost its life. It was so badly injured that it was filled with fear ever since. Since that dark night, Atsu almost no longer trusted anyone other than Lu Chen. Perhaps Exin was an exception. It also stopped looking for the strange beasts in the forest. When it recovered and went to the Dog Head Mountain again, Atsu found that the strange beasts looked at it in a different way. The respect they once had was gone. Instead, it was replaced by mockery, contempt, and ferocity, who would look up to a dog that was covered in wounds and had only one eye and half of its tail left. When it passed by, the tiger roared at it, The crane pecked its head with its beak. The monkey grabbed a branch and swung it across the sky, reaching out to grab half of the dog's tail and laughing crazily. There were even more beasts that looked on coldly. No matter how the black dog wailed, they were indifferent. Occasionally, when the dog fell in front of them, they would kick it. In all the forests in the world, the strong preyed on the weak. If the strong were to be respected, who would sympathize with you when you were crippled and suffer? Atsu once looked up at the peak of the mountain. The huge figure was lying there as usual. It looked like it was sleeping, but it also looked like it could not be bothered to care about these trivial things. After that, Atsu left that place and never returned. Since then, it stayed by Lu Chen's side even more. Even if it was a dark night, it would curl up next to Lu Chen to sleep. That day, the sun was warm. It shone on the sea of clouds and the black dog's body. Atsu yawned lazily and lowered its head to the ground. It felt a little bored. It glanced at the mountain path that led down from the flying goose platform. There was no one on the mountain path. It knew that there was still some time before Lu Chen returned. A few crisp chirps of birds came from the forest. Atsu thought for a while, then got up and walked toward the back of the mountain. It seemed to have a love for the forest in its body. It liked the feeling of being in the forest. Walking into the forest behind the flying goose platform, there were old trees and vines that had grown for many years everywhere. The air was filled with a fresh scent, which made Atsu feel much better. It sniffed everywhere and seemed to be happy. Even its footsteps became lighter. Just like that, it walked and stopped, running and jumping. The changing light and shadow in the quiet forest was like a paradise that belonged only to the black dog. Suddenly, Atsu stopped in its tracks. It raised its head and stared ahead with its only eye. There was a big rock next to a big tree over there. A figure stood under the rock. At that moment, it heard the noise and turned to look. When its gaze swept across Atsu, it smiled. It was White Lotus. This mysterious and beautiful fairy-like girl suddenly appeared in the forest behind the flying goose terrace. At first glance, she seemed to be a beautiful fairy in this emerald green forest, but for some reason, there seemed to be a trace of an indescribably strange aura about her. She smiled and waved at Atsu. Then, she lay on the rock and looked forward, as if she was secretly peeping at something. Atsu was a little hesitant. It instinctively wanted to step back, but after a moment, White Lotus waved at it again. Atsu slowly walked to her side. White Lotus pointed behind the rock and whispered to Atsu, "Look." Atsu also became a little nervous. It secretly poked its head out and saw that in the open space in the forest about 6 feet behind the rock, there was a guinea pheasant standing on the ground, looking for food in the fallen leaves with its head down. It was also at this moment that Atsu suddenly heard a soft and somewhat bewitching voice, like the whisper of the devil floating beside it. The pheasant's meat must be delicious. Atsu's body suddenly tensed up. Chapter 188. In the quiet forest, White Lotus and Atsu were like thieves, sneakily hiding behind a big rock, peeping at the pheasant that was foraging for food in the forest in front of them. The pheasant looked very beautiful, with beautiful pearl-like spots dotted on its bright feathers. Its long tail feathers kept moving up and down, sweeping across the forest in a stunning arc. Atsu watched for a while, then retracted its head and turned around to leave. However, a small white hand stopped it. White Lotus looked at it with a faint smile on her face, then gently hugged Atsu's neck. For some reason, Atsu was wary of almost everyone except Lu Chen and Exin, but only in front of this White Lotus. Although it was not very close to this little girl, it did not react too strongly to White Lotus's various actions. Right now, Atsu was somewhat obediently pulled back by White Lotus. Its only eye was looking at White Lotus's overly beautiful face, and its eyes flashed with a little uneasiness. White Lotus pressed it down and sat behind the rock, ignoring the dirt on the ground. She just smiled, then moved closer to Atsu's ear and whispered, "I think, you are a different dog. There are some strange things about you that I have never been able to figure out." Atsu tilted its head and seemed to want to leave again, but it was pulled back by White Lotus. The little girl stared into Atsu's eyes. Although this black dog was ugly and fierce, she did not have the slightest disgust or contempt. In fact, there was a rare trace of gentleness in her eyes. She just smiled and whispered, "You should be more than this, Atsu. I don't know why you don't eat blood and living things." She gently raised her body and glanced at the gap in the rock. After confirming that the pheasant was still behind, she turned around and said to Atsu, "You are the first demonic beast I have seen that survived after suffering from the blood-eating secret method. Do you know what this result means?" She clenched her fist and waved it in front of Atsu, saying, "In those dirty barbarian tribes, demonic beasts like you have another name. Holy beast." White Lotus said with a smile, then gently touched Atsu's head. Kunwa City, Black Hill Pavilion. Lu Qin stood up and said to Old Ma, "It's getting late. You keep an eye on these things first. Later, we will." Before he finished speaking, Old Ma stretched out his hand and stopped him, saying, "Don't go yet. I still have something to tell you." Lu Qin said, "What is it?" Old Ma said, "I found he gang." Lu Qin raised his eyebrows. He glanced at Old Ma, then sat down again and said, "Where?" Old Ma said, "In this Kunwa city." Lu Qin smiled and said, "Good. Fatty, your methods are more powerful than I thought." Old Ma said modestly, "You flatter me. This is my job. It's my duty. There's no need to make a fuss about it." Lu Qin snorted and said, "Hypocrite. There really aren't any good fatties these days." "Hey." Old Ma couldn't take it anymore and said, "How can you be like this? You always become hostile and scold people. Although some people have wronged you, not all fatties are like this. Let me tell you, fatties also have dignity." Old Ma said righteously. "Oh, I'm sorry," Lu Qin said. Old Ma was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect Lu Qin to admit his mistake so straightforwardly. For a moment, he felt a bit embarrassed and said with a hollow laugh, It's actually nothing." "It's nothing." Lu Qin smiled faintly and looked at Old Ma without saying anything. Old Ma suddenly felt a bit scared when he was looked at like this. He subconsciously took a step back and said, What are you thinking? I'm telling you, don't mess around. Fatties aren't easy to deal with. I'm telling you." Lu Qin walked forward and patted his shoulder. He suddenly sighed and said softly, "Old Ma, it's my luck to have you accompany me for more than 10 years. He paused for a moment and then said word by word, "Thank you." Old Ma was stunned for a moment and then slightly lowered his head. After a moment, he suddenly laughed, but his laughter was a bit hoarse. He scolded with a smile, "Thank you my ass. Do you think I really wanted to accompany you? Wasn't it because I had no other choice? I'm telling you, you owe me a lot of favors for more than 10 years. "Oh, did I?" Lu Qin asked. "Nonsense, of course I did. How many times have I helped you? How many times have I saved you? If I exchanged all of that for spirit stones, it would be enough for us to buy a street in Kunwa City. Is it actually so valuable? But why do I feel that even if the two of us added up, we wouldn't be able to exchange for a single shop in Kunwa City? Not to mention an entire street." "Oh. This isn't important." Old Ma rubbed his head and very calmly threw this awkward question to the back of his mind. Then, it could be seen that his mood suddenly became very good. He had a very happy smile on his face. He laughed and reached out to pat Lu Chen's shoulder, but he quickly withdrew his hand. He probably felt that doing so was too unmanly. He took 2 steps to the side and took a deep breath. He seemed to have regained his composure. He then turned around and said with a smile, "Less nonsense. Tell me, what should we do with that he gang?" Lu Qin pondered for a moment and said, "Keep an eye on him for the time being. Don't touch him." Old Ma grunted and said, "But he has always been investigating that matter." "What should we do?" Lu Qin said, "Let him investigate. Maybe he can alert some people hiding in the dark." "Fine. Then you be careful." Lu Qin thought for a moment and said, "But it's not good to completely ignore it. You find someone to keep an eye on that guy. Otherwise, when we're about to make a move, we can't suddenly find him. Old Ma nodded and said, of course, that's not a problem. But what do you plan to do about making a move? Lu Qin smiled and said, this depends on he. If the time is right, we can use his most valued younger brother to force him. Presumably, he will also do something unexpected. Old Ma glanced at him and nodded in agreement. Lu Chen was silent for a moment. Then, he suddenly smiled bitterly and said, what I said. Am I born to be an evil person? Old Ma comforted him, how can there be so much right and wrong? Our hands have been stained with a lot of blood, but I always feel that what we've done all these years is always right. Lu Chen stared into Old Ma's eyes and said, is that what you think? Old Ma nodded and said frankly, yes, that's what I think. I feel that the two of us, as well as the Supreme, have never done anything wrong. Lu Chen took a deep breath and nodded, you're right. Then I'm leaving. Take care. Be careful. I'll find a chance to go down the mountain in a couple of days. Lu Chen said. Old Ma sent him to the door of the Black Hill Pavilion and said, that's fine. It's all up to you. In short, it's all about your own safety. Don't force yourself. Lu Chen smiled and turned to leave. But Old Ma suddenly seemed to remember something and asked him, right? You told me about the three-eyed strange insect earlier. What? Did you think of something? Lu Chen turned to look at him. Old Ma shook his head and said, that's not it. I'm just a little curious. If that strange insect was as fierce and gluttonous as you said, there would have been a fierce battle when it met you that night? He looked at Lu Chen and asked, what was the result of the battle? Lu Chen closed his eyes for a moment, and then he shrugged and said, that strange insect really was ferocious and very troublesome. I was thrown into confusion when it suddenly charged out, and I was almost injured by it. But then I used a dagger to defend myself. After a few rounds, the strange insect couldn't do anything to me and ran away. As he said this, one of his hands hung at his side. In the sleeve of his robe, there was a hard and coarse charred black stone gently rolling in his palm. There were some fierce marks on it. Old Ma let out an ah and looked a little disappointed. I see. Didn't the strange insect leave anything behind? Any bones, limbs, or pieces of flesh would do. Perhaps it would be easier to find it this way. He paused for a moment and smiled. Looks like you've recovered well recently. Although your cultivation has been crippled, your combat power is not low. Lu Chen was silent for a moment. He looked at Old Ma. His lips moved slightly, but he still pursed them. He curled his fingers and clenched the remains of the strange insect in his hand. Then he smiled and said, yes, I didn't leave anything behind. You slowly go over and bite its neck. Bai Lian's voice reverberated through the quiet forest, reverberating in Atu's ears. It was as if the first time they had met, the scene of blood-stained red once again appeared before his eyes. Atsu's breathing began to quicken. White Lotus looked at Atsu. There was a hint of excitement in her eyes. It was the kind of joy a girl would have when she saw her favorite toy. There was also a hint of strange cruelty in her eyes. Go. You are different from the other demonic beasts. They should be ants crawling under your feet. You're the holy beast that's rarely seen in 100 years. Go bite it and drink its blood. Atsu slowly turned its head. Its only eye reflected the figure of the pheasant. There was a touch of blood, but it seemed to be struggling. After killing and drinking blood, you'll be completely different, Atsu. White Lotus gently squatted beside the black dog and stroked its head. Her face was like a fairy, but her voice was like a demon from hell. It was light and full of bewitchment. Go. After you start killing, the power of the blood-feeding secret method will grow in your body. You'll become a more powerful existence than any other monster. Atsu suddenly raised its head and looked in front. At that moment, no one knew whether the crippled black dog understood the meaning of those words. However, its eyes had already turned completely red. Blood Red. Chapter 189. The days passed quietly, and a lot of things happened naturally. Su Qingjun went back to the Su family. Under the comfort and persuasion of her father, Su Tianhe, she finally reconciled with her family. Originally, they had been a family of blood relatives for decades. How could they really cut off this familial love? Moreover, Su Tianhe gave his genius daughter enough face and punished the three brothers of the Su family. Even Su Qingjun's mother, Madame Bai, had tears in her eyes. She hugged Su Qingjun and cried. As a result, after the storm, the Su family became harmonious again. However, after this time, the entire Su family clearly saw that Su Qingjun's status in the family was like a crane in a flock of chickens, and no one could compare to her. After returning to the mountain, Su Qingjun saw Lu Chen. She was a little embarrassed, but she still told him about it. Lu Chen just smiled and congratulated her. He didn't say much, nor did he complain about the pain and suffering he had suffered in vain. Su Qingjun wanted to make it up to him, but she didn't know what to do at the moment. She thought that there was still a long way to go, so she wasn't in a hurry. In any case, now that Lu Chen had the status of a nominal disciple, she had a reason to take care of him. In the future, she would find a chance to accept him as a direct disciple. She would provide him with all kinds of resources and elixirs. At the end of the day, he would be able to reach the foundation establishment realm. That way, his life of cultivation wouldn't be in vain. There were still 18 days until the next full moon. When the moon rose, it seemed to be thinner than yesterday. The moonlight was still very bright. It shone on the window sill of the wooden house on the Flying Goose Terrace like frost and snow. Lu Chen lay on the bed and quietly looked at the night outside the window. After a while, there was a slight movement in the darkness. Atsu walked over and leaned against him. He lifted his front feet and placed them on the window sill. He also looked at the moon outside. The moonlight shone on the man and the dog, and it was as soft as water ripples. Lu Chen reached out to touch Atsu's body and found that the black dog was staring at the moon in the sky in a daze. Its only eye was shining with an inexplicable brilliance, like a black, transparent gem. There was a hint of loneliness in his gaze. He looked forward to it. Lu Chen looked at Atsu quietly and did not disturb it. After a while, Atsu turned around and looked at Lu Chen again. Under the moonlight, Atsu's single eye flickered and gradually became gentle. Then, it obediently lay down beside Lu Chen, snuggled up to him, closed its eyes, and fell into a deep sleep. Lu Chen closed the window and darkness descended upon the room. For a moment, he suddenly wished he had a mirror so that he could look at his own face and eyes. Because just now, he suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity from Atsu's gaze. It was just like him 10 years ago. These few days, when it was late at night, Lu Chen would secretly go out and walk through the mountain paths of the Kunlun Mountains in the dark, carefully testing the boundless darkness. However, the strange three-eyed strange insect never appeared again. That soul-stirring and dangerous encounter that night seemed to be an accident, or perhaps it was just an inexplicable coincidence. If it were not for the fact that Lu Chen was still holding a hard, charred stone in his hand, the scene that night might really be like a dream and not real. However, the rough feeling of the black stone in his hand kept reminding Lu Chen of the evil behind the stone. When it was late at night, when even Atsu was immersed in dreamland, Lu Chen quietly left Flying Goose Terrace and walked into the deep night. He did not tell Old Ma the whole truth about the strange three-eyed insect, especially when he had already killed such a monster. Because once he told him, it would inevitably involve the biggest secret in his body at the moment, the unprecedented black divine disk, and the horrible nature of robbing vitality to grow. He did not want others to know. Perhaps he had been a shadow for too long and was no longer used to trusting others. Even when it was Old Ma who he could entrust his life to, he instinctively wanted to keep the last bit of the secret, as if he was hiding his last trump card. If the strange three-eyed insect did not appear, the matter would have ended without a hitch. Perhaps it was really just a strange monster that came out of nowhere. However, could there really be such a coincidence in this world? In the vast Kunlun Mountains, the strange three-eyed insect did not look for anyone else, and it just happened to meet him. Lu Chen had been a shadow for many years, and he no longer believed in coincidences, including this time. Therefore, he had been thinking hard about this matter, thinking over and over again, trying to find out what was different about him or what was so eye-catching about him. But after thinking about it, he found that he seemed to have only one secret, which might be different enough to attract such a monster. It was still the mysterious black divine disk in his ocean of energy. That night, he pondered for a long time on the dark mountain path, then closed his eyes slightly to the night. The darkness surged around him like a tide, like the rising waves of the sea. When he opened his eyes again, the dark flames were already burning in his pupils. The silent black flames slowly burned on his body. At this moment, there was no longer the pain and despair of the past. The black flames seemed to have become a part of Lu Chen's body, swaying on his flesh. The night was as dark as ink, and the darkness rolled like a tide. This man stood in this dark night, as if he was roaring angrily at the boundless darkness in front of him, a call. Then, the night was cold, and the darkness was like an abyss. There was no response. Everything seemed dim and dull, only the feeling of loneliness still lingered around him. Lu Chen was a little disappointed, and he quietly let the black flames shrink back into his body and extinguish. But at this moment, his heart suddenly moved, and he looked towards the depths of the Kunlun mountain range. That was a distance that could not be seen, that was the most mysterious forbidden area of the Kunlun mountain range. There was a thick fog that did not dissipate all year round, and there were 4 strange mountain peaks floating in the sky. Passing through the darkness, passing through the mountains, an inexplicable throbbing suddenly surged from the void, as if someone was looking in this direction from afar, but it also seemed like nothing had actually happened. Lu Chen sensed that something was off. But that feeling disappeared in a flash, and did not even give him extra time to carefully savor it. It disappeared in an instant just like that. However, Lu Chen could already feel that something was different in this short period of time. Something was really over there, in that forbidden area, and it was resonating with the dark aura in his body. What kind of secret was hidden in this quiet and incomparably huge Kunlun mountain range? And this secret, could it be related to the spy of the devil cult? During the day, someone came to the Flying Goose platform, and despite Lu Chen's dissuasion, insisted on calling Su Qingjun out of the cave. Su Qingjun was a little unhappy. Of course, this was easy to understand. But very soon, the news brought by this person made Lu Chen and Su Qingjun a little startled. The case of He Changsheng's murder, which had caused a sensation for a while but soon died down, suddenly stirred up waves after dragging on for such a long time. He Yi, who was entrusted by the sect masters to investigate this matter, was under great pressure, but still insisted on investigating to the end. Finally, he found something and began to take action. However, the first person he attacked still surprised most of the people. Because He Yi brought people to detain the 3 brothers of the Su family, Su Mo, Su Qian and Su Wen. Detaining them under the pretext of investigating the assassination of the devil cult was tantamount to suspecting that the 3 brothers of the Su family were not only related to He Changsheng's death, but also possibly colluding with the devil cult. This accusation, or rather, this crime was too big and too heavy, so heavy that even the Su family could not bear it. So, the Su family quickly began to take action. They mobilized their informants in the Kunlun party, as well as some cultivators they were on good terms with to inquire about the news. At the same time, they also tried their best to help the 3 brothers of the Su family. Among them, the most important was of course Su Qingjun, so the message brought today was to implore Su Qingjun to help as soon as possible. After listening to the news, Su Qingjun looked grim. She did not discuss it with Lu Chen, closed the stone door of the cave, and directly went down the mountain with the messenger. After watching Su Qingjun go far away, Lu Chen also looked down the mountain with a complicated expression. Unlike Su Qingjun, who knew almost nothing about this matter, Lu Chen knew almost everything about He Changsheng's murder case. In this world, who knew the most about a murder case? It must be the murderer. Lu Chen waited on the Fian platform for a while, then also got up and went down the mountain. When the Fian platform quieted down, and there was only one dog left, Atsu looked a little anxious and irritated. It looked at the forest in the back of the mountain again and again. After a while, it slowly got up and walked in. There was a faint light in the forest, and Atsu could see its surroundings very clearly. As it walked, it heard the familiar chirping of birds. However, that day, Atsu did not meet White Lotus again. In fact, after meeting White Lotus that day, Atsu did not see her again. The little girl, who was only a little over 10 years old, seemed to be busier than most adults. Not seeing White Lotus, Atsu did not seem surprised, and even looked a little more relaxed. But soon, its body tensed up again, because it saw a little bird suddenly fly to the ground in front of the forest, using its beak to search for food in the thick layer of leaves. Almost without any hesitation, Atsu slowly approached it. Its figure and movements were almost silent, as if it was born to do so. Like a genius hunter, it slowly approached the bird. Suddenly, the black dog pounced on the bird, and before it could startle it, it bit its wing. Chapter 190. He Yi's sudden action seemed tough and abrupt, and his target was the Su family, a well-known aristocratic family in Kunwa City. Therefore, it was hard for people not to think of what happened to his younger brother, He Gang, some time ago. Revenge in public? Or was he deliberately framing others? All kinds of guesses and rumors quickly spread, but after Su Qingjun went down the mountain and met her father, she learned about it through her trusted subordinates in the sect, so she had a general idea of what was going on. First of all, he did take people to detain Sumo and the other two brothers of the Su family, but he only detained them temporarily. He didn't convict them, nor did he interrogate them by torture. In the words of the other side, he just asked them some questions. There was, of course, a world of difference between questioning and convicting them. Although the Su family was still indignant, they calmed down a little. As for why he didn't find anyone else but the Su family, the other side also gave a very powerful reason that made the Su family speechless. Before He Changsheng's accident, the three brothers of the Su family had ganged up on and humiliated He Changsheng in the fragrance garden. To put it bluntly, they beat him up and threatened him. Then, a few days later, He Changsheng died. If this was not a big suspicion, then no one was more suspicious. When Su Tianhe and the others learned about this, they were also speechless for a long time. But after all, he was a blood relative of the Su family, so they couldn't really give up. Therefore, the Su family still tried their best to mobilize all kinds of connections in the Kunlun party to plead for him. But this method, which had always been successful in the past, ran into a snag this time. The reason was that he didn't fall for it, and the other virtuous elders in the sect declined one after another, unwilling to get involved in this trouble. For this reason, Su Qingjun even went to find her master, Masato Kihara, and the answer she got was, first, make it clear that if there was nothing wrong, nothing would happen, and they would let him go. Second, this matter was very troublesome. It was said that even immortals paid attention to it. Ordinary people, including immortal Yuanying, didn't want to get into trouble. In a somewhat anxious and angry mood, the Su family secretly made up their mind to find trouble with He Yi. But soon, their anger turned into surprise. The three brothers of the Su family had been questioned separately. Most of the time, the three of them could answer most of the questions. However, when He Yi asked the crucial question, which was the night He Changsheng died, where the three of them had gone, Su Qian and Su Wen both gave their own testimonies. However, after Su Mo answered, it was unexpectedly proven that he was lying. Sumo said that he slept alone in his residence that night, but very soon, someone proved that he went out, and then several people saw him. As for asking where he went after that, Sumo was dumbfounded and couldn't answer for a long time. Of course, there was something wrong with this situation. Needless to say, Su Qian and Su Wen were released, but only Sumo was detained. But this time, it wasn't so polite. She was directly detained in a secluded quiet room, which was equivalent to being locked up. After that, there wasn't much news, but as it spread, it gradually became dark. Because it was said that he was eager to make a contribution, and planned to, or had already started to try to use torture on Sumo. Retribution in the present, retribution in the present. Lu Chen arrived at the Black Hill Pavilion opened by Old Ma in Kunwa City. Listening to Old Ma's gloating tone, Lu Chen couldn't help but shake his head and say, "Don't be too happy. We still don't know whether this news is reliable or not. It's all spread by others. Who cares?" Old Ma laughed and said, "In any case, I've long disliked that guy Sumo. It's best if he suffers a bit more. Unfortunately, my identity is limited, otherwise I really want to go and see with my own eyes." Lu Chen waved his hand. He was too lazy to argue with Old Ma about these things. He sat there and pondered for a moment before saying, "This time, he acted without any warning. Almost no one knew about it beforehand. It feels a bit strange. It seems like he suddenly got hold of some information, so he began to vigorously investigate." Old Ma frowned and the smile on his face faded a bit. He looked at Lu Chen with a hint of worry and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong? Is there any danger?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "Not yet. Let's wait and see first." After a pause, his eyes suddenly flashed and he said, "Could it be that he got the information from the martyr's grave?" Old Ma walked to the side and returned after a moment. He handed him a letter and said, "Take a look yourself." Lu Chen glanced at the envelope and saw that there was no signature, no specific name, and no word on the envelope. He took out 2 pieces of paper. After reading it, he suddenly nodded and then sighed softly. "The damn Baldy said that he will rush back 3 to 5 days before the next full moon night." Old Ma smiled and said, "You see, I told you long ago that the old man still likes you the most. Even if you are a little uncertain, he is still willing to believe you." Lu Chen didn't comment, but he was still silent for a while. Then he stood up and walked 2 steps in the room. He said to Old Ma, "You pay attention to he gang these days. It's better to send more people to keep an eye on him. Don't let him suddenly run away." Old Ma narrowed his eyes slightly and said, "What do you want to do?" Lu Chen said indifferently, "I haven't thought about it yet, but I've thought about one thing before. Maybe it's a plan to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. If he pursues this matter strictly and refuses to let Sumo off, and at the same time, his only blood brother suddenly meets with an accident in Kunwa City, what will the result be?" Old Ma pondered in silence. After a while, he suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at Lu Chen. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Lu Chen calmly said, "Killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The general idea is that he will definitely suspect that the aristocratic families of Kunwa City, specifically the Su family, did it. In order to vent his anger, he killed his brother, so the hatred between him and the Su family will be deep. Secondly, when the Su family hears this news, they will definitely think that he will be furious. Then, who will he vent his anger on?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Good plan. Not bad, not bad." Lu Chen looked at Old Ma and said, "Although Sumo is stupid and annoying, his identity is different from others. He is the legitimate son of clan head Su Tianhe and Su Qingjuan's blood brother. The Su family will absolutely not tolerate anything happening to Sumo." But Old Ma seemed to want to say something, but he was stopped by Lu Chen. Lu Chen didn't have any intention of speaking loudly. He just said to him very calmly, "In the next few days, arrange for someone to go there and do it cleanly." Old Ma was silent for a moment before he nodded and said, "Okay. Right, there's one more thing. When you came last time, you told me about the strange 3-eyed insect." Old Ma suddenly changed the topic and began to talk about other things. "Oh," Lu Chen said, "How is it? Did you find any clues?" Old Ma's expression was a little solemn. He looked at Lu Chen with a strange look in his eyes and said, "I've looked into this thing, but the result seems to be that this thing has been extinct for thousands of years. It has long disappeared from this world." Lu Chen was stunned and said in surprise, "What did you say? What is this thing?" Old Ma said, "According to the appearance and talent you mentioned, I couldn't find any clues at first. But after looking through some ancient scrolls with a long history, I finally found a monster similar to it in the oldest one. Blood-devouring insect. That's the name. Old Ma said. Blood-devouring insect? Lu Chen frowned and thought for a moment. He said, I don't think I have heard of it. It's normal that you haven't heard of it. Even for me, this is the first time I have heard of such a monster. When I went to the library of ancient scrolls and saw the blood-devouring insect, I was really worried about you. Lu Chen said, why do you say so? Old Ma didn't answer and asked, do you still remember the legend of the two founders of the Kunlun party occupying the spirited mountain of Kunlun and establishing the sect? I remember. The senior brothers and sisters in the Kunlun party had told this story countless times, but there were always people who forgot it. Old Ma nodded and said, it is related to that. Legend had it that when the two ancestors, Kun Yuanzi and Tai Luo, established their sects, they used their great magic power to drive all the animals down the mountain. As a result, all kinds of demon beasts ran amok and created a foul atmosphere. But it doesn't matter. It is said that there was a sign in the sky that the divine dragon came to the world and passed down the orthodoxy for thousands of years. But at the same time, evil spirits appeared in the mountain and countless monsters attacked the living creatures. There is a monster called blood-devouring insect. Lu Chen frowned and asked, since this thing is so terrible, why didn't the Kunlun party know about it? That's because this thing was completely wiped out 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. Old Ma smiled bitterly and then said in a low voice, that's why I said that you really seem to have met a ghost this time. Something that hasn't been seen for thousands of years came to trouble you as soon as it came out. Lu Chen shook his head and said, according to what you said, these blood-devouring insects should have been extinct for thousands of years? Yes. Back then, it appeared with the evil spirits that were born in the Kunlun mountains and harmed the world. At least that's what the book said. Old Ma shrugged and said, I don't know what happened thousands of years ago. Lu Chen slowly stood up and whispered, it seems that there are a lot of strange things in that forbidden area. What did you say? Old Ma asked him. Lu Chen shook his head and then said to him, now there are more things on the Kunlun mountain. I may not be able to come down at any time these days. He gang, you can keep an eye on him. If you see any great opportunity, you can send him off yourself. I'd like to see if Yi's affection for his brother will be so desperate that he will completely fight with the Su family. At that time, if he recklessly acts recklessly and things become more and more chaotic, maybe the traitor will also reveal a little. He stood up and smiled at Old Ma. Then he put his hand in his sleeve and touched the scorched stone, a blood-devouring insect that had been completely burned to ashes. Chapter 191. There were still 16 days until the next full moon night. The Su family worked hard in the sect, hoping to rescue Sumo. Because no matter what, they didn't believe that Sumo, who had been pampered and spoiled since she was a child, would have any relations with the cruel and vicious evildoers of the devil cult. In fact, it wasn't just the Su family who thought so. Most of the people from influential clans in Kunwa City also had similar views. Therefore, the rumor that Yi suddenly found trouble with the Su family was to vent his anger for the matter with Yi gang a while ago naturally spread. This kind of rumor was very damaging and often made people unable to advance or retreat, making them very depressed. But this time, Yi seemed to be determined to go through with it to the end. From beginning to end, he remained indifferent to the pressure from the outside world. Despite the pressure from the Su family, he still hadn't released Sumo. The activities of the Su family in the sect also encountered unexpected resistance. Almost all the Taoist masters in the Yuanying realm and above refused or declined the requests to intercede on their behalf, including Su Qingjuan's Shifu, Masato Kihara. This deadlock lasted for a day or two, and the atmosphere in the Kunlun party suddenly changed. Many of the originally indignant and seemingly very angry clans suddenly became silent. They were all old foxes who had mingled in the mountains of Kunlun for several hundred years. Who didn't know how to listen to the wind and who didn't know how to steer according to the wind. Although Su Qingjun quarreled with Sumo and the others a while ago and even taught them a lesson, causing her and her family to be in a cold war for a while, no matter what was said, Sumo was still her blood-related younger brother. But no matter what, Sumo was still her blood-related younger brother, and her parents were worried sick. She couldn't stay out of it, so she went to plead with her master, Master Miyuen. The whole Kunlun party knew Masato Kihara's love for Su Qingjun, but on that day, he still shook his head and refused Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun was puzzled. Masato Kihara sighed. Seeing that there was no one around, she said to her softly, "Now is not like before. This matter already has the intention of Senior Immortal. They will definitely investigate it thoroughly, and no one can stop them. You should also behave for the time being. Don't stand out at will." Su Qingjun was shocked. Her face turned pale, and even her voice trembled as she whispered, "Shifu. Could it be that Hakushin Jinkuen actually did something to our Su family?" "Shut up." Masato Kihara's expression suddenly changed. She immediately opened her mouth to stop Su Qingjun, and then observed the surroundings. Although the two of them were in Masato Kihara's own cave, and it was almost impossible for ordinary people to eavesdrop on their conversation, but Masato Kihara's expression was as careful as a thief. After observing the surroundings for a while, Masato Kihara let out a sigh of relief. Then, she pulled Su Qingjun to another secluded place and said, "Listen carefully. First, this matter is not targeted at your Su family. It's just that your younger brothers were unlucky and happened to encounter this matter. They also happened to give the truth to others, so naturally, we have to investigate. But if there is a justifiable reason, then he will not make things too difficult for you. Didn't you see that Su Qian and Su Wen have both gone back?" Su Qingjun responded. Her complexion looked a little better, as if she had breathed a sigh of relief. However, she was still a little worried and asked in a low voice, "What about Sumo?" Masato Kihara did not answer her question. She just snorted and said, "The second thing you don't know is that the one who pays attention to this matter is not Hakushin Jinkuen, but perfected Lord Tianlan." "Ah." Su Qingjun was shocked and said, "Grandmaster Tianlan? How could he?" Masato Kihara said with a sullen face, "Although martial uncle Tianlan is not often in Kunlun Mountain, he is after all one of the two supreme perfected gods of Huashan realm in our sect. I heard that a few days ago, the senior suddenly wrote a letter in his own hand, sternly reprimanding sect leader Xianhua Shixiang, saying that in the Kunlun Mountains, a devil cult evildoer unexpectedly killed people, which is really a shocking matter. Moreover, after many days of investigation, there is still no progress, which is even more incompetent." Su Qingjuan's beautiful face turned pale when she heard this. Although she had not yet reached the highest level in the cultivation world like Jinren Yuanying, she had been influenced by aristocratic families since she was a child, and because of her outstanding talent, she had followed Masato Kihara for a long time, so she still knew some of the changes in the sect. At this moment, she subconsciously covered her mouth with her hand and said in surprise, "Grandmaster Tianlan, how could he speak to a mortal sect leader like this?" Masato Kihara smiled and said, "He is a perfected god of Huashan realm, and also the martial uncle of Idle Month, of course he is qualified. Didn't you see that although Idle Month was unhappy at that time, he still gritted his teeth and endured it?" Su Qingjun was a smart person, and she quickly thought of another matter. She whispered, "Then Grandmaster Bai Chen," Masato Kihara said lightly, "In this kind of matter, it is impossible for martial uncle Bai Chen to come forward and say anything." Su Qingjun nodded, but there was still a worried look on her face. Masato Kihara glanced at her, sighed, and said, "Qingjun, you know that our Tieji is weak. Now there are undercurrents in the sect, and the open and secret struggles are all on the Kuinji side. Not to mention other things, just the two perfected gods, who are in the open and in the dark, are not people we dare to get involved in at all. Otherwise, if those two get angry, the consequences will be unimaginable." Su Qingjun nodded silently and didn't say anything else. Masato Kihara thought for a moment and comforted her, "But in my opinion, if your brother really didn't do anything, he will suffer a little at most. It shouldn't be a big deal." Su Qingjun suddenly raised her head and said, Master, is that true? Masato Kihara smiled and said, now that perfected god Tianlan has suddenly come forward to put pressure, even sect master Idle Month Martial Uncle can't take it, let alone he, a little disciple. Therefore, they must give an explanation. Under such circumstances, they won't easily let off anyone who is even slightly suspicious, but they probably won't deliberately make a confession through torture. How can they fake it in front of a perfected god? So, he patted Su Qingjun's shoulder and said gently, go back and tell the head of the Su family and the other family members that they have to temporarily endure it. It will be better after this period of time. Our Kunlun party is a famous sect with 5,000 years of history. The sect rules are strict, and we definitely won't wrongly accuse an innocent person. All right. Su Qingjun said softly. These words were told by Masato Kihara to Su Qingjun in private. Many people who hadn't reached the level of perfected Yuanying couldn't see it so clearly. This was the case for the Su family. However, after Su Qingjun brought back this news, the head of the Su family, Su Tianhe, made a prompt decision to immediately cease all activities and prepare to listen to Masato Kihara's advice. There were some twists and turns in the process. Madame Bai, who was anxious for her son, was heartbroken and wanted to save him as soon as possible. She made a small fuss, but it was quickly suppressed by Su Tianhe. After sending off her family, Su Qingjun returned to the Flying Goose Terrace with worry for Sumo. She looked at the sky and saw that it was almost dark. She stood by the roadside for a while and saw that the door of the wooden house was closed. She could vaguely see a figure inside. She seemed to want to go over and say a few words, probably to chat with Lu Chen. However, in the end, she walked back to the cave in the mountain wall without saying a word and didn't come out again for the whole day. Lu Chen lay in the wooden house and saw the appearance of Su Qingjun when she came back. However, he didn't have the intention to greet her. Instead, he stayed on the bed with Atsu in his arms and watched the sky turn dark and the moon rise. That night, the moon was already as thin as a hook, hanging alone in the sky. Atsu squatted on the bed beside him and looked up at the moon through the window, lost in thought. Lu Chen gently stroked Atsu's head. He didn't know when, but Atsu had fallen in love with the moon. It often stared at the bright moon for a long time, but it didn't howl at the moon like many wolves and dogs. It just silently looked at the moon, unusually quiet, but there was a strange aura emanating from its body, making people feel that it was different from the black dog in the past. The next day, the seemingly calm Kunlun mountain suddenly stirred up waves. Before noon, Sumo, who the Su family was worried about, had not been released, but he sent someone to ask a few people to his place. These people, including Lin Kuangyi and Zhang Ji, were all at the scene of the dispute in the Liuxiang garden that day. After hearing this news, Lu Chen had a bad feeling. Sure enough, someone came to Fian platform in the afternoon. That person was a Kunlun disciple from the Heavenly Soldier Hall. In terms of seniority, he was He Yi's junior. When he came here, his words were polite, but his attitude was very firm. He invited Su Qingjun and Lu Chen to go with him to meet He Yi. Everyone chatted. At this time, of course, no one was willing to chat with He Yi. He said he was chatting, but everyone knew that he had a bad idea. If they were not careful, they might be detained, and the detained people would not dare to resist. First, there was the strict rules of the Kunlun party, and this matter was personally ordered by the sect leader to track down the evildoer of the devil cult. Behind this, there was also the figure of the high and mighty perfected deity of Huashen. Who dared to offend such a person? Lu Chen and Su Qingjun did not intend to resist. They happily agreed, and then followed the person to meet He Yi. But in his heart, Lu Chen greeted the damn Baldy many times in a friendly manner. Previously, it was only said that He Yi detained people, but when they were really brought to the location, Lu Chen was stunned to discover that He Yi had actually placed the place where the suspect was detained and interrogated directly in the martyr's grave at the back of the nameless mountain peak. When he saw that black courtyard and confirmed that it was the location, Lu Chen suddenly had a kind of secret delight in his heart. Staying in this kind of place and not letting go, that person called Sumo would most likely suffer a lot these days. Different from Lu Chen, Su Qingjun had never been here before. Looking at this gloomy place, Su Qingjun, like almost everyone else, revealed a disgusted and surprised expression. It seemed that she had never thought that on the Kunlun mountain, there would actually be such a place. Although it was not fast, they still had to go. But when they were about to knock on the door, suddenly the black door outside the martyr's grave was suddenly opened. Then a person staggered out, his steps were somewhat unsteady. Looking closely, it was He. Chapter 192. Lu Chen and Su Qingjun were both taken aback. After looking at each other, they both stopped in their tracks. The Kunlun disciple who led the way was also taken aback. He hurriedly rushed over and supported He. He anxiously said, Shixiang, what happened to you? He waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. He then saw Su Qingjun and Lu Chen behind him and nodded to them. Seeing that his expression was generally normal, it didn't seem like something serious had happened. Su Qingjun and Lu Chen then walked over. Su Qingjun looked at He and frowned. Shixiang, what happened to you? Why do you look so pale? He smiled bitterly. He was about to say something when suddenly the others seemed to have sensed something. They all turned their heads to look in the direction of the black courtyard of the martyr's grave. They saw a gust of wind carrying bursts of smoke and dust suddenly soar into the air like an earth dragon, twisting in the courtyard. The sound of the wind was mournful. One could even faintly hear the sharp whistling sound of the air breaking. Even from far away, one could feel the strong spiritual power rolling near the wind vent. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. Su Qingjun, who was next to him, also looked quite surprised. She said, "Someone is fighting inside?" Before her voice died away, the sound of the wind suddenly became 10 times stronger. It actually rushed directly towards the door. In an instant, sand and stones flew away. Su Qingjun's expression changed slightly in the wind. She suddenly reached out to grab Lu Chen's arm, intending to pull him back. Who knew that her grab would actually grab empty air? She looked back in surprise and found that Lu Chen was running much faster than her. In just a short while, he had actually fled several feet away. It was no wonder that she couldn't catch Lu Chen. Su Qingjun snorted. She glared at Lu Chen in annoyance and awkwardness. She followed him and mumbled, "His cultivation is not high, but he runs fast." Lu Chen's ears were sharp, and he actually heard these words. He smiled at Su Qingjun, who was walking over, and said, "I can't help it. It's not easy to get by in this world, and I don't have the invincible talent like you geniuses. Any one of you is enough to annoy us, the janitor disciples. So, you can do anything in cultivation, but you can't slack off in escaping. You talk too much." Su Qingjun first smiled, then scolded him. On the other side, He took in the two's conversation and expressions. He seemed to be deep in thought, but his expression didn't change much. After a while, the wind gradually weakened, and the earth dragon in the air seemed to be affected by some powerful force. It twisted more and more, and then suddenly broke in the middle and fell to the ground. Then, the wind stopped. A person walked out from the black courtyard, and it was Dongfang Tao. The darkness rolled and rolled behind him, and one could vaguely see another withered and skinny figure. It was the corpse watcher, but he clearly didn't have much interest in the people outside the cemetery. Since this figure had appeared, the people who seemed to have been in a fierce battle just now were naturally Dongfang Tao and the corpse watcher. This discovery shocked Lu Chen and Su Qingjun. It should be known that Dongfang Tao had broken through to the Yuanying realm, and could be considered as another powerful figure in the Kunlun party. But the most surprising thing was the corpse watcher. Although he looked ugly and skinny, like a lonely old man, or like an old man who had been decaying for many years, from the situation just now, this corpse watcher must have used all kinds of strange secret techniques. Compared to a true Yuanying realm master, he did not seem to be at a disadvantage. Of course, why these two people fought, and why they suddenly stopped, was not something Lu Chen and Su Qingjun could guess. Dongfang Tao said something to the corpse watcher, and it seemed that he was a little angry. The corpse watcher also responded with a few words, and it gave off a somewhat strange feeling, which immediately made Dongfang Tao angry again. But even so, in the end, Dongfang Tao actually suppressed his anger and left the back of the dark mountain peak. On Dongfang Tao's way out, He, Su Qingjun, and Lu Chen all lowered their heads and bowed to him. Dongfang Tao did not pay much attention to these young people, and at most nodded at He as a sign of respect. Watching Dongfang Tao swagger off, Lu Chen and Su Qingjun finally reached the edge of the doorway. He was one step ahead of them, and rushed into the courtyard first. He looked at the corpse watcher and said, "Senior, look, you guys do what you need to do, don't mind me." The corpse watcher said coldly, then turned around and walked into the darkness, looking completely different from usual. He let out a long sigh, and turned to greet Su Qingjun before chatting idly. Lu Chen listened on the side, as if he did not exist. After some hypocritical pleasantries, Su Qingjun asked He, "Senior brother He, why did you call us over?" He waved his hand, and said, "It's not a big deal. It's just that He Changsheng's death was very tragic, and some higher-ups in the sect couldn't stand it, so they gave the order to thoroughly investigate the matter." He paused for a moment, and his smile was a little modest, but also a little depressed, so much so that no one could tell what he was thinking in his heart. "It just so happens that the two of you were in the flowing fragrance garden that day, and were also there when the quarrel happened." Lu Chen and Su Qingjun's faces suddenly darkened, and Su Qingjun said to He with a dark face, "Senior brother He, you called us over without any evidence, I'm afraid it's a little too much." He's expression did not change, and he said indifferently, "If the two of you have any opinions about me, you can go directly to sect leader Idle Month to complain. Once there's an order, I will naturally stop." This order would not be obtained, and Su Qingjun's heart was as clear as a mirror. She took a deep breath, and said, "If that's the case, if there's anything, Senior brother He, you can ask. But before that, I want to go see my good-for-nothing brother, is that okay?" "I'm afraid that's not very convenient." He directly refused, and then said to Su Qingjun with great respect, "Su Junior sister actually don't have to worry too much, we still have some questions to ask other than Master Su, to see if they are in cahoots with the evildoers of the evil faction." Su Qingjun snorted, and said, "Anyway you called us over, are you suspecting our identities?" "That won't be the case." He smiled, and said, "Even if I suspect anyone, I won't suspect you. But what needs to be done still needs to be done, in view of the fact that there are many evil faction spies in the cultivation world, it's really hard to guard against them. I was a little rude to the two of you, please forgive me." Immediately after, He did not say any more superfluous words, and directly started to interrogate them, and in the middle of it, he even separated the two of them for a period of time. He did not ask many things, but the consecutive questions were somewhat difficult to answer, among which the most crucial one was the night He Changsheng died, where was the person being interrogated. Originally, 3 members of the Su family were arrested, but after Su Wen and Su Qian explained where they went that day, they were released. Instead, Sumo, who had been hemming and hawing and refused to clearly state where she was that night, was directly detained. He seemed to really do what he said, and did not make things difficult for Su Qingjun, but when facing Lu Chen, he seemed to show another side. He started to interrogate Lu Chen where he was that night, would there be anyone who could prove it? Lu Chen thought for a while, and realized that he would always be alone, unable to prove others, and unable to prove himself. He immediately became hostile and announced to Su Qingjun, "I'm going to keep this person for now and interrogate him." Su Qingjun argued with reason, and was unwilling to let Lu Chen stay, but He refused to let him go, and only said that he would not harm Lu Chen, but he really wanted to interrogate him. Until now, Sumo had not finished asking, so she did not let him go. Of course, Lu Chen was also unwilling to stay, but seeing that He was determined, he gave Su Qingjun a look, signaling her to calm down. With the advice from her master, Masato Kihara, Su Qingjun knew the vast and profound background behind this matter, and naturally felt a bit of respect. And Lu Chen was often away, who would really care about this? And the real reason why Lu Chen agreed to stay, was actually because he was curious about this grave, the mysterious corpse watcher, and those dead people. He brought everyone to this gloomy grave for interrogation, and whether there were other hidden motives. Lu Chen suddenly wanted to see the face of the person who had been caught and refused to let go. In the end, the two of them came together, but left alone. This scene made Su Qingjun feel a bit uncomfortable, and the gaze she stared at He was particularly unfriendly. He smiled bitterly, and did not explain much, and sent Su Qingjun away. In fact, if it was possible, He also wanted Su Qingjun to stay, but in this way, most people on Taiji's side would speak up, and the Su family would be completely enraged, and they might do anything. That kind of chaos was not what He wanted, nor was it what Immortal Idol Month and his master, Dukanjinren, wanted. Lu Chen was brought to a dark room. In this gloomy place, because of this place's special purpose, even the room looked particularly scary. According to he was tired today, and asked Lu Chen to rest first, and talk tomorrow. Lu Chen did not refute, and silently accepted He's words. Until he was in this dark room, and when he began to try to see and explore the surroundings, he suddenly heard a weak and painful voice from the corner of the room, containing fear. "Save me, save me, save me." Lu Chen immediately stopped, and turned to look at the place where the voice came from. After a moment, he suddenly walked a few steps in that direction, and came to a corner. Then, he squatted down and looked at the figure who was huddled up in the corner. He sighed and said, "Young Master Su, how are you?" Chapter 193. To tell the truth, Lu Chen did not expect that he would be able to see Sumo so quickly and smoothly. Originally he thought that Sumo, as the only suspect and detained suspect, would at least be locked up in some secret place and strictly guarded. Who knew that He would actually appear to be somewhat careless and directly lock the two of them together? This action was not normal, or it should be said that it was not normal at all. Whether Sumo was the evil sect spy or not had not been determined. Casually locked up with other people, wouldn't it be dangerous? Also, that day when Su Qingjun returned to the Su family and made a big fuss, Lu Chen was tormented and seriously injured by Sumo and the rest. These things were not difficult to find out. Lu Chen did not believe that a scheming person like He would not know about it. And now that he was locked up with Sumo, there seemed to be some meaning in it. These thoughts flashed through Lu Chen's mind like a spark, but there was not much change in his expression. Only looking at the man who was hiding in the corner in the dark room and moaning for help, he could vaguely see that he was the once arrogant Sumo. Lu Chen greeted Sumo, but Sumo did not respond to him. Her mouth was still muttering those two simple words. Lu Chen frowned, squatted down in front of him and saw clearly that Sumo had shrunk into a ball, buried her head on her knees, her hands behind her head, as if she was very afraid. Save me, sister, save me." Sumo was still speaking intermittently in a low voice. Her voice seemed to be trembling. Instead she did not respond to Lu Chen, who was very close at hand. Lu Chen reached out and gently patted Sumo's shoulder. Sumo's body shrank a little, but it seemed to be an instinctive reaction. There was no other movement. This situation seemed a little strange. Lu Chen stared at Sumo and did not speak. He fell into deep thought. After a while, he suddenly stood up and looked around. This was a dark room. Most of the rooms in the martyr's tomb were like this. Because it was too dark, it was sometimes hard to tell how big the room was. And in this room, there was a place where the darkness was especially thick, right against the wall of the room. Lu Chen stared at the thick darkness, then looked at his surroundings. After a while, the corners of his mouth suddenly curled up. He sneered, and there seemed to be a hint of ridicule in his smile. By the time Su Qingjun returned to Flying Goose Terrace alone, the sky had already darkened. She was in a bad mood. All kinds of dark and strange scenes kept appearing in front of her eyes. She was a little worried, even more worried than before. She was worried about her brother, Sumo, and also worried about Lu Chen. As she walked on the mountain path, Su Qingjun made up her mind to go to the gloomy martyr's tomb again tomorrow morning. No matter what, she had to try her best to save them. Although there might be all kinds of inexplicable undercurrents behind this matter, it had nothing to do with Sumo and Lu Chen. When she walked up to Flying Goose Terrace, her body suddenly paused. In the cold night, she saw a black dog squatting alone in front of the wooden house, looking at the mountain path here. After a while, Atsu got up and slowly walked over. When it came to Su Qingjuan's side, it first looked behind her. When it found that there was no one there, Atsu raised its head to look at Su Qingjun and softly barked. Su Qingjun did not have much contact with this black dog. Because Lu Chen insisted on bringing Atsu with him, she did not mind and let Atsu live on Flying Goose Terrace, and they only met a few times. But tonight, she felt that Atsu seemed to be a little different from usual, but she could not tell what was different. Perhaps it was because they had too little contact. Su Qingjun sighed and said to Atsu, "Are you waiting for Lu Chen, Atsu?" Atsu looked at her and wagged its tail. Because it was injured, it only had one eye and half of its tail left. When it wagged its tail, it looked a little funny. Looking at its one eye and the remaining scars on its face, it gave people a sense of tragedy. These two completely different feelings were strangely mixed on this black dog. Su Qingjun felt a little apologetic in her heart, but then she felt a little funny. Looking at Atsu, she did not know why, but she still felt a little uncomfortable. She softly said, "Lu Chen has been detained, he can't come back tonight. But I have already thought about it. I will go there tomorrow. No matter what they find out, as long as I can't confirm that he is the traitor, I will definitely bring him back, okay?" Atsu quietly looked at Su Qingjun, the light in its only eye was dim and uncertain. The half of its tail behind it had unknowingly stopped. Su Qingjun saw that Atsu didn't respond for a long time. She didn't know if he understood her words, so she could only sigh softly. She then turned around and walked into the cave residence. She opened the stone door and walked in. The heavy stone door closed behind her, and the Flying Goose platform once again fell into silence. The night became colder. The black dog slowly stood up and walked to the edge of the cliff. It looked at the vast sea of clouds in silence. Its only eye lit up with a dark green light, like a crystal-clear gem, but also like the deep sea. It slowly raised its head and looked at the dark night sky. This night, the clouds were very thick, blocking the moonlight and the stars. It was as if there was only darkness left in this world. It stood there alone, the night wind getting tighter and colder. It looked up at the sky, its black fur swaying, and its dark green eyes shining. Suddenly, it raised its head and howled at the sky, at the night sky, at the dark clouds, or at the cold moon that could not be seen but must be hidden high up in the sky. A whoop, the mournful howl echoed above the sea of clouds, lingering for a long time. Su Qingjun did get up early the next morning. After dressing up, she walked out of the cave, ready to go to the cemetery. When she left the Flying Goose platform, she glanced at the wooden house, but she did not see Atsu, so she thought that maybe the black dog was still sleeping. Su Qingjun got up very early, but on the same morning, there was someone else who got up even earlier than her. He walked through the long street of Kunwa City, which had not yet become lively. Although the street was not lively, there were already some pedestrians. The fat old ma yawned. He saw a stall selling breakfast on the side of the road ahead, so he walked over and sat down. This kind of roadside stall, of course, sold food for mortals in the secular world. There was no such thing as food made of various spiritual materials, so ordinary cultivators would not patronize this place. However, Old Ma was obviously more like a mortal. He casually sat down, ordered some steaming hot breakfast and hot porridge, and ate them in big mouthfuls. His forehead was slightly sweaty, and it was only then that he seemed to heave a sigh of relief, looking a bit more comfortable. "It's so cold tonight," he said with some emotion. He then turned his head to the north and glanced at the majestic Kunlun mountain range. Even the tall city walls of Kunwa City couldn't block the rise and fall of the majestic mountain range. Old Ma pursed his lips and said to himself, "I've done what I should. You better not bother me. Let's see what you do next." He was in a daze for a while, then he called the stall owner to pay the bill. The stall owner was an old man, so he came over to settle the bill. When he turned around to leave, he suddenly saw Old Ma's hand, so he reminded Old Ma, "Sir, your hand is bleeding." Old Ma looked down and saw some blood between the fingers of his left hand. He immediately smiled and said to the stall owner, "Ah, I didn't expect to cut my hand." "Thank you, boss. I'll go bandage it later." The old man chuckled, put away the bowls and chopsticks, and walked away. Old Ma stood up and walked back to the street. As he walked, he calmly wiped his left hand under his sleeve. That trace of blood was wiped on it, then it disappeared from his hand. He happily and contentedly walked forward, just like an ordinary person. At this time, the street gradually became lively and more people appeared. No one noticed a fat man with bloodstains on his hand gradually walked into the crowd and disappeared. He did not sleep well that night. The energy in the righteous grave was too heavy, it was really not suitable for ordinary people to live in. Even for a foundation establishment realm cultivator like him, living here for a long time would also feel uncomfortable. If one lived in this kind of shady place for a long time, perhaps even one's temperament would become strange, just like that corpse watcher. He was actually curious about the corpse watcher. This skinny and shriveled old man was mysterious and obviously powerful. He also seemed to have some unexplainable grudges with the newly promoted Yuanying Jinren, Dongfang Tao, which made him even more unfathomable. But right now, these were not the things that he was most concerned about. He was recommended by Dukhan Jinren to sect leader Idle Month Jinren. He was wholeheartedly pursuing that evil faction spy murder case. However, this matter had been dragged on for a long time, he was actually feeling a great deal of pressure. And because of this, he had no choice but to gradually turn his methods more intense. It was already too late to use the previous gentle and tactful methods. Teacher and sect leader Reverend, they could not continue to indulge like that. He felt wronged, this evil faction spy's methods were ruthless but unusually cautious. Even with his very familiar experience with the evil faction, after so long, he still could not find any reliable clues. But in his heart, he did not blame those two teachers. Without them, he would still be in closed-door training and reflecting on his mistakes. Without them, he would not have been able to come out and do things so early. He even felt a little ashamed and felt that he had let down his teacher and sect leader Reverend. So, today, he felt that the reason why he could not calm down last night was because he did not do a good job. Then today, he must think of a way to carefully interrogate the two people who were currently detained, and strive to find out something. If there were any results, based on this merit, he would definitely be able to let his younger brother, Gang, return to the Kunlun party. When he thought of this, his somewhat heavy heart lightened up a lot. When he strode out of the room, he probably thought of his younger brother, the corners of his mouth carried a trace of a smile. But the moment he walked to the courtyard, he was suddenly stunned. On the grave's black main entrance, the room door was opened but he did not know when, but there was a black dog standing outside. The black dog was staring at him. Chapter 194. Of course, he had never seen one before. Or rather, even if he had, he would not have cared about such an ordinary black dog. However, when he saw the black dog, he was still slightly shocked. He was curious as to why a dog would appear in such a shadowy place where all living creatures and creatures avoided it. He was also surprised at the mutilations and scars on the black dog's body. This was a dog that had clearly been severely injured. Not only was it covered in scars, its one eye and half a tail made it even uglier and more frightening. He was also a normal person. When he first saw the black dog, he frowned and his eyes were filled with disgust. However, very soon, He's gaze changed slightly and his expression softened. This change was not because he had suddenly become kind and compassionate, but because he had suddenly thought of his younger brother, Gang. Because he had been surrounded by a pack of black jackals in the disorientated lands, Gang had been severely injured and disfigured. Now, after a series of twists and turns, he did not look like a human or a ghost. As his older brother, his heart ached for him. For some reason, when he saw this black dog, he suddenly thought of Gang and felt an inexplicable sense of compassion. So, he did not immediately chase the black dog away. Instead, he stood and watched for a while before walking over. The black dog looked at his figure in silence and did not move. It did not retreat, nor did it hide. There was a strange light flowing in its single eye as it stared at He's figure. He walked to the door and glanced at the black dog, then looked outside the door to confirm that there was no one outside. It seemed that no one had deliberately brought this dog here. However, this made it even more strange. After staying in the righteous grave for several days, he had long noticed that the Qi in this place was extremely strong. It was the enemy of almost all living creatures. In this righteous grave, there was not even a mouse or a cockroach, let alone wild beasts or birds. Could it be that because this dog was black, it was not afraid of this pitch-black righteous grave? This ridiculous thought flashed through He's mind. Even he himself felt bored, but he still had a good impression of this black dog. He waved his hand at the black dog and said, "This is not a place for you. Leave quickly." As he spoke, he made a gesture to drive it away. The black dog took 2 steps back. Although it was still staring at perhaps because He did not show too much hostility before, and even had a little bit of gentleness to it, the black dog did not react too aggressively to He. It glanced at the courtyard of the righteous grave and seemed a little hesitant. The darkness and the strange atmosphere inside made it very uncomfortable and it did not want to go in. So, after a moment of hesitation, the black dog retreated more than 10 feet away and found a large tree to lie down, as if it was waiting for something. He glanced over there and shook his head. He was too lazy to care about it. He couldn't even take care of the person, so who would have the time to care about the dog? He turned and walked into the depths of the courtyard. The door to the room where Sumo and Lu Chen, who had just arrived yesterday, was still locked. In the darkness on the other side, the corpse walked out of the shadows like a ghost. He nodded at him and looked at the tightly shut door again. There was a hint of worry on his face as he asked the corpse, "Senior, will they be all right?" The corpse's face was haggard and his expression seemed to always be as rigid as ever. After hearing He's question, he only replied faintly, "They won't die." He shook his head and seemed to smile bitterly. He then sighed and asked, "Did you find anything?" The corpse replied, "Under the influence of the mind-manipulating spell, their souls were agitated and injured, causing them to fall into a terrifying illusion. Their words are definitely true, so it shouldn't be them." He was silent. Seeing that the corpse ignored him, he casually waved in the direction of the door. A cold wind suddenly rose and swept across the courtyard. The door on the other side suddenly opened with a squeak. He frowned and walked into the room. After a while, he dragged 2 people out, 1 in each hand, and placed them on the ground. The 2 people were, of course, Sumo and Lu Chen. Between the 2, Lu Chen's face was ashen and his eyes were lifeless. He sat on the ground with a blank gaze, unable to even focus on He and the corpse. Occasionally, he would mutter a few words in a low voice, but it was unclear what he was saying. As for Sumo, his condition was even worse than Lu Chen. Probably because he had stayed here for a longer period of time. His entire person looked like an idiot, drooling and his eyes slanted. He looked completely different from that young master from before. He took a glance at Lu Chen and then most of his attention was still on Sumo. After watching for a long while, he suddenly stood up and said to the corpse, "Senior, this time many thanks for your help. But I think this matter should end here. As for how to track the evil sect's evil people, I will think of a way myself." The corpse's expression did not change. He only glanced at him and coldly said, "I owe you a little favor, that's why I helped you. Since you don't need it, naturally I won't care anymore." He sighed and said, "The main thing is that Senior's mind-manipulating spell is really too overbearing. I'm afraid if this goes on, these 2 people's minds will be completely destroyed. That odd job disciple doesn't matter, but Sumo is after all a person with a family background. It's not good to mess around." "As you wish." But remember, after this time, don't come and bother me again. The corpse said indifferently, then he turned around and walked into the depths of the courtyard. Before he left, his ghost claw-like palm waved at Sumo and Lu Chen. A few rays of gray light floated up from their bodies and followed him into the darkness. Sumo and Lu Chen's bodies suddenly shook. A moment later, their heads tilted and they both fainted on the ground. He walked over to take their pulse. He felt that these two people's pulse had gradually calmed down. He nodded his head in relief. After all, the Kunlun party was a place with rules. It did not allow him to act recklessly. If he really wrongly accused a good person and killed someone, even his master and the sect leader might not be able to protect him. After the mind-manipulating spell was lifted, between Sumo and Lu Chen did not seem to have changed much. On the other hand, Sumo's complexion was much better. At least the idiotic look of her crooked mouth and slanted eyes was gone. Her facial expression gradually returned to normal, but she still did not look too good. After about an hour, he suddenly heard a call from the entrance of the martyr's tomb. Senior brother He. He turned around and saw Su Qingjun standing at the doorstep with a solemn expression. She was looking in his direction. Then, her gaze fell on the two people lying on the ground. She immediately looked surprised and worried. He cupped his hands at her and said, "Good morning, junior sister Su." Su Qingjun walked over slowly. She seemed to still be suppressing her emotions to keep calm. She said, "What happened to them?" He said, "They were just released to get some fresh air." Su Qingjun's expression turned cold. She said, "What did you do to them?" He shook his head and said, "I didn't do anything. But I have already asked what I needed to ask. The two of them should have nothing to do with He Changxing's death. So when they wake up later, you can take them back." Su Qingjun was startled. Then, her face revealed a happy expression. At this moment, there was a sudden groan from the ground. Lu Chen was the first to wake up. Not long after, Sumo also woke up. He looked around blankly. His eyes were still a little scattered. After a while, he seemed to suddenly find Su Qingjun. His expression suddenly changed. He rushed over and hugged Su Qingjun. He shouted, "Sister, sister." Su Qingjun showed a pained expression. She reached out and patted his back to comfort him. At the same time, she looked at Lu Chen. She found that although Lu Chen's expression was a little strange, he could still control himself. He stood up shakily. Their eyes met. Lu Chen grinned, indicating that he was fine. Su Qingjun took a deep breath. She looked at He and said coldly, "Senior brother He, since you are fine, can we go?" He nodded and said, "Forgive me for not seeing you off." Su Qingjun supported Sumo. Lu Chen also looked a little weak, but he still walked alone. When they walked out of the gate of the martyr's grave, a black shadow suddenly walked out from a corner in front of them. The black dog stood quietly on the side of the road. It did not look at Su Qingjun and Sumo. It only looked at Lu Chen. Then, it gently wagged its tail and walked towards Lu Chen. When Lu Chen saw Atsu, his expression changed slightly. He then glanced at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun shook her head and said, "I didn't bring it here. I don't know how Atsu came here by itself." After a moment of silence, Lu Chen nodded and said, "I know. You can go first. I'll go back to the Flying Goose Terrace later." Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment. But Sumo's situation was indeed worse. She also had to send him back to the Su family in Kunwa City as soon as possible, so she couldn't care about Lu Chen now. So, in the end, she softly said, "I'll take Sumo back. After I settle him down, I'll come back to see you as soon as possible." Lu Chen smiled and said, "I'm fine. Don't worry." Su Qingjun responded and supported Sumo as they left. In the martyr's grave, the aura of darkness seemed to be everywhere, lingering around him and Atsu. Lu Chen squatted in front of Atsu and looked at Atsu. Atsu's only eye was also looking at him. He didn't know why, but he felt that the light in Atsu's eyes was somewhat different from before. But he didn't care. He just smiled and stroked Atsu's head, saying, "You've become smarter, stupid dog." Atsu silently shook its head. Lu Qin stood up and said to it, "Let's go home." The man and the dog walked outside. Just as they were about to walk out of the darkness, an anxious figure suddenly ran over from a distance. His face was filled with anger and anxiety. He rushed past them and ran into the depths of the darkness. Lu Chen's footsteps paused, and he turned around to look at that person's back. Then, he expressionlessly turned around and continued to walk out, stepping into the warm light. Chapter 195. The bustling streets of Kunwu City were filled with people coming and going as usual. It was as peaceful and prosperous as if all living things were happy. In the distance, Kunlun Mountain was lofty and majestic. The sun was warm on Fian platform. Lu Chen was lying on the bed of his wooden house, quietly looking at the scenery outside the window. Far away from the hustle and bustle of the city, in the small courtyard of the Black Hill Pavilion, old Ma was sitting there. He had changed his clothes, carried a basin of water, and was carefully washing his hands. The blood stains made the water a little red. He looked at the red color with a strange expression. He stretched out a finger and gently drew a few strokes on the reddish spots in the water. It seemed like he was stirring randomly, but it also seemed like he was writing a word. Faint traces of blood gently circled around his fingertips, floating and dispersing in the water, so that the word couldn't take shape. Soon, even the blood itself disappeared. Old Ma raised his head and looked at the sky. After a moment of silence, he pulled a piece of cloth from the side and carefully wiped his palm clean, not leaving the slightest trace. The morning wind blew through Kunwu City, bringing with it a slight chill. A group of people gathered outside the gate of a certain house. There was a faint smell of blood in the air. It was coming from that house. The crowd of onlookers looked a little excited, as if they had lived ordinary lives for too long and finally had a lively scene to watch. However, from beginning to end, no one tried to enter the courtyard. Who was a fool these days? Being wise to stay out of trouble was the right thing to do. Later, a figure suddenly flew over from afar and rushed into the house like an arrow leaving the bow. Because his speed was so fast, there was even a sharp whistling sound as he broke through the air, making people unable to clearly see his figure and face. Immediately after, several figures rushed over and landed at the gate of the house. The difference was that they all clearly appeared in front of the crowd. The crowd of onlookers suddenly became restless because the people standing guard in front of the gate were cultivators wearing the uniform of Kunlun Party disciples. The person who rushed in the front with the fastest speed was He Yi. The place he rushed into was the residence of his younger brother, He Gang, several times before. When he received the news and rushed here, when he smelled the faint smell of blood, his heart slowly sank until he rushed into the courtyard and saw the bloody scene. He Gang was lying on the ground in the middle of the courtyard, already dead. There was also a bloodstain on his side, from his bedroom to the place where he died. It seemed that he had struggled to crawl from there. He had lost a lot of blood, so his skin looked a little pale, which made his already disfigured face look even more terrifying. He Gang's eyes were still wide open, as if he had died with a grievance, but no one knew what he had seen before he died. He Yi stood there stiffly, looking at the corpse on the ground in a daze. Just a few days ago, he was still sitting together with him, looking forward to the beautiful days in the future, and even exaggeratedly thinking about what kind of good sister-in-law he should find for his brother in the future. Sometimes, He Yi really thought that he and his younger brother could live well like this, that he would become successful and famous, that he would be successful in his cultivation, and that he would take good care of him for the rest of his life. The past flashed past his mind like scenes, from the lonely childhood, the brothers who depended on each other for survival, to supporting each other for so many years, from when he was young to now, from when he was young to when he was mature. The only thing that never changed was his smile, Big Brother. At this moment, like a death knell, the sound of Big Brother rang again and again in his ears. He only felt that his heart was beating crazily, as if it was about to explode. He thought that he was going crazy, shouting and yelling, but in the end, he could not make a sound. He just staggered forward, and then knelt down beside his younger brother's corpse. The smell of blood assaulted his nostrils. He suddenly felt like vomiting. His hand trembled a little, and he slowly reached over and gently touched He Gang's head. His younger brother's head shook slightly, but there was no reaction. Where he touched it, his fingertips felt a trace of coldness that seemed to seep into his bones. He clenched his teeth, his mouth silently contorting for a moment. Then, he lowered his head, his entire body tensed up and trembled. He forcefully swallowed all the anger and pain. "He's dead, he's dead, he's dead." There was a bitter smile on his face, but there were no tears, only desolation. Then, he gently used his hand to wipe his younger brother's eyes, wanting him to at least rest in peace, but after trying a few times, he found that the eyes could not close. He slowly retracted his hand. "All right," he said softly, "just open your eyes, Big Brother promises you, I will help you get revenge." He Gang's face did not change. The matter of having a spirit after death seemed to be just a legend after all. He lowered his head, and was silent for a very long time. Then, he quietly began to help his younger brother tidy up his body, smoothing his clothes, and straightening his body. Then, he found that He Gang had a hand under his body. He tried to pull his hand out, but when he flipped over He Gang's body halfway, his body suddenly trembled, and his movements abruptly stopped. After a moment, he relaxed his movements, lightly pulling He Gang's body to the side, revealing the piece of ground he was originally pressing down on. One of He Gang's hands was still there, his fingers stained with dark red blood, using blood to write a crooked and terrifying character on the ground. Sue. That crooked character was like a sharp blade that was stabbed into his chest, that dripping blood, imprinted in his eyes like a burning scarlet flame. He stared at that character, the muscles at the corners of his eyes twitching slightly. At this time, the sound of footsteps came from behind him. It was the junior brothers that he brought with him walking in. He seemed to want to say something, but he quickly closed his mouth. A trace of a desolate smile appeared at the corners of his mouth, and then it quickly disappeared. His face became gloomy, and in the end, indifferent. He stood up, and with a step, he stepped on that character. The several Kunlun disciples next to him walked over. When they saw the bloody scene, they all had frightened, angry, and unbearable expressions on their faces. One after another, they came up to comfort Hee. He slowly nodded, and without saying anything else, he only said in a soft voice, "Thank you, junior brothers, for helping me." As he said this, he slowly walked forward, but as he lifted his foot, there seemed to be an infinitely heavy pressure on his shoulder. When he took a step forward, a dazzling trail of blood appeared under his foot, and it was a bloody mess. Some people helped him to the side to rest, while others sighed and prepared to clean up the mess. In the middle of it all, they glanced at the ground. In the middle of it, there was nothing but fresh blood on the ground. Only when the sun shone down, it illuminated the bloody and tragic shadow. There were still 13 days until the next full moon night. There was some turmoil in the Kunlun party, and it was about Hee. His only relative, his younger brother, He Gang, was suddenly killed in Kunwa City, and his body was thrown in the courtyard. When the news came, Hee was so grieved that he almost couldn't do anything, so the murder case of He Changsheng, which caused a lot of trouble, suddenly quieted down. Dukanjinren, who cherished his disciple, once again summoned Hee back in the name of closed-door meditation. He went to the sect master, Reverend Idle Month, to ask for forgiveness, and took all the responsibility. But Reverend Idle Month was also open-minded and didn't really pursue the matter. In any case, they were all from the same sect. If someone was to blame, they could only blame the devil cult's evil man for being too treacherous and cunning. It was just that in the sect, everyone seemed to hate the devil cult to the bone and felt indignant about the injustice, but in private, there were some whispers that couldn't be brought to the surface. He Gang didn't die earlier or later, but he died when Hee was investigating the murder case on a large scale, and he died after Hee detained the Su family. The water was deep. Many people said so, with a meaningful smile on their faces. The Su family, on the other hand, remained silent. Originally, when they brought Sumo back, they were indignant and wanted to fight back and take revenge. But suddenly, overnight, all the Su family were directly locked up at home by Su Tianhe, and were not allowed to go out easily. The atmosphere in the Kunlun party was a little strange, but in any case, things that didn't come out publicly, everyone could pretend that it didn't happen. Life still had to go on. When the moon at night began to slowly become full from the smallest crescent, Lu Chen also went out several times in the middle of the night, hoping to encounter the strange three-eyed bug again, but he didn't find anything. That night really seemed like a dream, everything seemed to be the same as before, nothing had changed. Until one night, he suddenly saw Atsu lying on the windowsill, suddenly raised his head, and howled at the dark sky, and heard that mournful long cry. Lu Chen suddenly sat up. After the long cry, Atsu turned to look at him, and suddenly jumped out of the window. Without any hesitation, Lu Chen directly jumped out, and then followed Atsu, all the way to the forest behind the mountain of Flying Goose Terrace. The dark forest emitted a deep darkness under the night sky, and the old and sturdy trees were like tall giants, but Atsu didn't seem to have any fear, and directly ran into the forest. Lu Chen followed, ran all the way, and gradually came to the depths of the forest. Then, somewhere, Atsu suddenly stopped, and Lu Chen also slowed down and stood beside it. He first looked at it, and then looked around. It was a little dark, but he could see the shadow of a big stone in front of him, and there seemed to be some things around it. Lu Chen's expression suddenly changed. He took a few steps forward, and then gradually saw the things there. Beside the stone, there were many corpses of birds and small animals, all of them were bitten to death. He suddenly turned back and stared at Atsu, only to see that in the darkness, the dim light in Atsu's eyes gradually lit up, and gradually became brighter. Like a dark green flame. Chapter 196. Lu Chen's eyes met Atsu's. In this quiet night, in this dark forest, there was a night wind blowing above the trees, and there was a slight rustling sound of the branches and leaves swaying. There was also a glimmer of light, like a green flame, much brighter than the eyes he had seen in the past. There was not much smell of blood around, even if there were many corpses of birds and beasts, perhaps the blood had dried up after a long time. There was a low gasp from Atsu's mouth, as if it was hiding a trace of pain. Its eyes began to change, with a hint of madness, as if at this moment, there were suddenly two thoughts suddenly colliding in its mind, tearing at each other crazily. The green light also became unstable, sometimes bright, sometimes weak, like a candle flame swaying in the wind. Lu Chen looked at it quietly, his face cold, and there was a trace of coldness in his eyes. But this night, Atsu seemed to be really different from before. It was struggling, fluctuating between quiet and violent emotions, and the darkness around it gradually became turbulent, surging wave by wave. In the quiet forest, it seemed that even the sound of a needle falling on the ground could be heard. No one would have thought that in this quiet night, they would suddenly confront each other here. The darkness gradually gathered into a tide, and wave after wave washed over. The green flame in Atsu's eyes became brighter and brighter, as if it was going to explode in the next moment. The mountain forest seemed to be silent. All the creatures were holding their breaths and even the trees were cowering. Only in the depths of the darkness, in a ghostly place, there seemed to be a demonic gaze staring at this place, revealing a look of excitement. Suddenly, Lu Chen suddenly turned around, and without any warning, rushed into the darkness on the other side of the forest. Atsu, who was squatting and growling in a low voice, suddenly raised its head, and the green light in its eyes flickered, as if it was a little shocked at this moment. In the darkness, it was as silent as the sea, but after a moment, the darkness suddenly burst like a raging wave, and suddenly scattered. Low roars and sharp whistles mixed together, and all kinds of strange sounds with a creepy aura burst out. Even Atsu subconsciously took 2 steps back, and at the same time, it seemed that its attention was diverted, and the green flame in its eyes slowly dimmed. Bang! Someone groaned in pain in the darkness. 2 figures were thrown out together, but they did not separate in midair. Instead, they were still fighting, and the various moves they used were all extremely vicious and merciless. Every move was fatal, and every move was bloody. The figures descended from the sky. One of them was Lu Chen. At this moment, black light flashed in his eyes, and his aura was completely unleashed. It was filled with a chilling killing intent. The normally harmless errand disciple was nowhere to be found. Right now, he was clearly a cold-blooded killer. And opposite him was a petite figure, who clearly had an unearthly beautiful face, but the ruthlessness of her attacks was like the most terrible evil spirit. It was White Lotus. The battle between these two people was practically a repeat of the last time. They didn't possess any of the dignity and grace of cultivators, and all they utilized were ruthless, sinister, and ferocious methods. They stopped at nothing for the sake of killing each other as soon as possible. Blood instantly flew, and drops of blood stained the white and beautiful face of White Lotus, like the red dew on the beautiful flower petals in the morning, and it was shocking. When she fell, she had already scratched Lu Chen's chest, and her white fingertips instantly whistled up with wind and snow, and in just a moment, she had already pierced Lu Chen's chest. However, the wind and snow only stopped here, because almost at the same time, a hand rushed out from the darkness like an evil spirit, and had already grabbed White Lotus's slender neck. Lu Chen was like a roaring evil spirit, wildly rushing up, and White Lotus moaned in pain. Her fingers trembled, and the ice and snow exploded on Lu Chen's chest, and the countless fragments of ice crystals all turned the color of blood. Lu Chen let out a low roar, and his face twisted, as if his whole body had fallen into an ice cellar. But at this moment, it seemed that all the blood in his body was cold, and he was isolated from all the pain, ignoring it. Those 5 terrible fingers flickered with black flames, and in an instant, they burned into White Lotus's flesh and blood. White Lotus screamed, and her whole body was grabbed by the neck by Lu Chen, and with a loud bang, her body heavily hit the trunk of a large tree. Suddenly, the surroundings trembled, and countless leaves fell like rain. The murderous rain in the darkness. It was as if the air had suddenly quieted down, and all the noise had died down. Gradually, the sound of falling leaves could be heard, as well as Lu Chen's slightly pained panting, and White Lotus's already twisted breathing. The green light in Atsu's eyes had almost completely disappeared, and it seemed to be stunned by the sudden scene just now. Only now did it react, and then it hesitantly stood up, and slowly walked a few steps towards Lu Chen and White Lotus. As it got closer, it could clearly see that in the still falling leaves, Lu Chen slightly lowered his head, as if he was sucking in cold air, and coughed softly. His chest was a mess, and his right hand was straight in front of him. He still grabbed White Lotus's neck, and pushed her against the tree trunk, so that her petite body was suspended in the air, and her face was pale, as if she was about to suffocate to death. In the forest, there was only silence. Atsu looked at the two strange people, and hesitantly took a step forward. Suddenly, Lu Chen turned his head and looked at it. His empty left hand suddenly raised, and he pointed a finger at it. He pointed at it condescendingly. Along with this movement, a few scalp-numbing cracking sounds came from his body, like the sound of ice cracking. Then, a gush of blood gushed out from his chest. Atsu immediately stopped in his tracks. It looked up at Lu Chen, and that finger was just above it. Deep in the man's eyes, there seemed to be wild black flames burning, and endless black tides swept over. He stood in the darkness, like a god or a devil. All the hair on Atsu's body seemed to stand up in an instant. After a moment, it lowered its head, and slowly lay down under that finger, showing all its submission and awe. Lu Chen took a deep look at the black dog, then turned his head, and looked at White Lotus in front of him. His eyes were as violent as a demon, and as cold as the ice on his chest. He stared at this fairy-like little girl, and after a moment, he said coldly, "Is it fun?" White Lotus was suspended in the air under that hand that seemed to be cast from iron. Her face was in pain, but for some reason, she was still smiling when she looked at Lu Chen's face while panting. "It's fun," she said, looking straight at Lu Chen, and there seemed to be a hint of provocation in the depths of her eyes. Lu Chen's 5 fingers tightened again, and White Lotus groaned in pain. Her suspended body twisted a little, like a thirsty fish thrown onto the shore. "You are forcing me to kill you," Lu Chen said coldly. "You don't dare to kill me." Almost immediately after his words, White Lotus immediately responded. Then her legs kicked a few more times, as if she was finally unable to breathe, and her body began to soften. Lu Chen silently looked at this strange girl who seemed to be a mix of light and darkness, beautiful and fierce angel and demon. After a while, he suddenly let go of his hand. White Lotus let out a soft cry, and her whole body fell down. After falling to the ground, she covered her neck with both hands, and began to desperately gasp for breath. After a while, she finally calmed down. Lu Chen looked at her quietly, then sighed, and said, "You are right, I don't dare to kill you." The darkness in the forest, at this time, had gradually calmed down, no longer surging like the tide, nor was there that kind of fierceness. Instead, there was a hint of quiet gentleness. Lu Chen walked to the side of Atsu, and very naturally sat down on the ground next to it. At this moment, all the different aura on his body had disappeared, and he seemed to have changed back to the usual gentle and useless odd-job disciple. However, Atsu seemed to be more familiar with Lu Chen's aura. It gently leaned over, using its head to rub against Lu Chen's thigh, and then nestled beside him, just like before, intimately, as if nothing had happened. On the other side, White Lotus also walked over after resting for a while. After that life and death battle, she seemed to suddenly forget everything, just like Atsu, as if nothing had happened, and naturally sat opposite Lu Chen and Atsu. The atmosphere was a little vaguely strange. Lu Chen raised his head to look at her, and said, "I thought we had already made it clear before." White Lotus said, "What do you mean?" Lu Chen said, "Well, water does not interfere with the river water, as long as we stay away from each other, we will be safe." White Lotus thought for a moment, and said, "I originally thought so, until I saw Atsu again." Atsu raised its head to look at her from Lu Chen's side. Lu Chen stretched out his hand to press its head, and touched the fur on its head, and said, "Hmm?" White Lotus stared at him, as if trying to find some clues from Lu Chen's face, and said, "This dog has the aura of the blood food secret method." Lu Chen shook his head, and flatly said, "There is no such thing." White Lotus sneered, "You think you can dismiss me with this sentence, I will not be wrong." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, and suddenly said, "Don't forget that the world is big, and there is not only one blood food secret method, there may be other magical powers that you don't know. And even if it is the blood food secret method, it is not unique to you. On what basis do you make wild guesses?" White Lotus said, "Of course I know this, in fact, even if this dog really has the blood food secret method, it doesn't matter to me. But the most important thing is that this dog did not go crazy or die after being used the blood food secret method." She sneered, and looked at Lu Chen, and said, "Don't tell me you don't know what this means." Lu Chen gently touched Atsu's head, but fell silent, and did not say a word for a long time. Chapter 197. In the end, nothing happened that night. Lu Chen and White Lotus parted ways in the dark forest. They went their own ways and went their separate ways. When the beautiful girl disappeared into the forest like a ghost, Lu Chen brought Atsu to Flying Goose platform and returned to his wooden house. Late at night, the clouds parted and the moon appeared. A faint ray of moonlight shone on the windowsill and shone on Lu Chen and Atsu. Atsu looked up at the sky. The crescent moon was like a hook, while Lu Chen stared at Atsu. After a while, he stretched out his hand and gently touched Atsu's back. Atsu turned its head and glanced at him. Lu Chen frowned slightly. After a while, he suddenly said, "You can't stay on this Kunlun mountain anymore." Atsu's only eye flickered. Lu Chen's hand gently stroked Atsu's body. Its fur was soft and smooth like black satin. However, under this smoothness, there were pieces of bulging flesh and bones. There was blood that flowed extremely fast, and there was the sound of a strong beating heart. It was an unfamiliar power that was slowly gathering in this black dog's body. One day in the future, it would finally burst out. "I didn't expect you to become like this." Lu Chen gently touched Atsu and whispered, "I just wanted to save your life at that time, but there was really no other way." White Lotus, that little girl, always thought that what you had was the blood-feeding secret method. In fact, that was not the case at all. What I used that day was the devil cult's reincarnation formation and the blood soul crystal fragments that I condensed with my evil method. At that time, I only thought of prolonging your life. But I didn't expect that you could actually absorb the blood soul crystal fragments and activate all the potential of your bloodline. This result is almost exactly the same as the blood-feeding secret art, so she's mistaken. Lu Chen smiled and said, Atsu, I think your father, whom you have never met, must be an extremely powerful demonic beast. That's why he could give you such a strong bloodline. Atsu leaned forward. It wasn't clear if it understood Lu Chen's words, but it didn't say a word from beginning to end. Lu Chen didn't mind. He raised his head and looked out the window, looking at the moon high up in the sky. After a while, he said softly, you can only stay for another 10 days at most. When the night of the full moon arrives, you won't be able to endure it anymore. Before that, you must go down the mountain. The next morning, the sky was bright. When Lu Chen walked out of the wooden house, he saw Exian's figure walking quickly from the foot of the mountain. Although she told Lu Chen that she would come back to see him as soon as possible, but in fact, these days, Su Qingjun hadn't come back. As for the reason, Lu Chen actually knew very well that Sumo's situation was actually far worse than when she came out of the martyr's grave that day. Mind-manipulating spell was a very overbearing spell, but it couldn't be said to be evil or evil. In fact, similar methods existed in both the righteous faction and the devil cult. But firstly, it was very difficult to practice, and secondly, it was very easy to backfire on oneself. So there weren't many people who practiced it. Needless to say, there were many madmen in the devil cult. As for the righteous faction, there were also people who practiced similar spells, but almost all of them were in Fuyunji under Zheng Xianmeng's command. After all, this kind of spell was almost of no help to the cultivator's own cultivation and strength, but the danger was not small. Most of the time, it could only be used as a means of interrogation. Lu Chen didn't know much about the other halls of Zheng Xianmeng, but he knew Fuyunji like the back of his hand. That day, he saw that Sumo was cast with an extremely overbearing mind-manipulating spell, and her mind was damaged. Moreover, the person who cast the spell was very ruthless and ruthless. It seemed that in order to get what he knew, he didn't care about Sumo's life at all. At that time, Lu Chen felt a little strange. He felt that he didn't seem to go so far, otherwise, he would directly fall out with the Su family. With the Su family's current reputation and Su Qingjuan's advancement to Jin Dan, doing so would directly become a life and death enemy, which was really stupid. Until, later, he saw the person who looked at the corpse. For a moment, he almost thought that the person who looked at the corpse was a spy sent by Zheng Xianmeng Fuyunji to the Kunlun party. Compared to the various things around Lu Chen these days, whether it was people or things, all seemed to be hazy and gloomy, only Exian that he saw this morning was bright. She bathed in the bright morning light, walking briskly. When she saw Lu Chen standing on the Fian platform, she suddenly laughed, then waved her hand vigorously, and ran over to him. The sunlight shone on her face, reflecting an unusually bright brilliance. The fresh mountain wind also seemed to follow her, swirling and dancing, blowing over this mountain peak. Brother Lu. Exian called out to him with a smile. Lu Chen nodded to her, revealing a trace of a smile, and said, Why are you here? Oh, Sister Su sent someone to pass a message, asking me to come and see you, said Exian with a smile. Lu Chen slightly raised his eyebrows, and said, What happened to her, asking you to pass a message for her? Exian sighed, showing a trace of helplessness on her face, and said to Lu Chen, Sister Su has something to do at home, she really can't leave, but I heard from her that you seem to be injured, and she is also a little worried, so she asked me to come and see you. Sister Su also said that if you feel that your injury is really serious, let me take you to Bai Chao Tang first to have a look, and don't worry about anything. In the future, when she returns to the mountain, she will naturally return this favor. Lu Chen smiled, and said, She is a careful woman. Exian said with a smile, That's right, Sister Su is a good person. I say, Brother Lu, you are really lucky, if it were someone else, it would be impossible for them to treat a part-time disciple like this. Lu Chen glanced at her, and suddenly asked with a smile, "What about you?" "Ah." Lu Chen asked, "If you also encountered the same situation, would you be concerned about an ordinary part-time disciple like her?" Exin frowned her beautiful eyebrows, seeming to be a little distressed and hesitant, and after a moment of hesitation, she stammered, "Well, me, probably not." Lu Chen laughed out loud, and pointed at Exin, saying, "You are a bad woman." "Hey!" Exin suddenly became a little angry, and glared at Lu Chen, shouting, "Why do you ask me these things for no reason?" "Well, most people don't care about a part-time disciple they are not close to, okay?" Lu Chen shrugged, and said, "It's over, it seems that if something really happens to me in the future, I can't count on you." Exin's cheeks blushed, but she shook her head and said, "That won't happen, Brother Lu. You are different from others, I will definitely take care of you." Lu Chen was a little surprised, and looked at Exin, and said with a smile, "Really?" Exin nodded, and said, "Really. You are alone, if you are really beaten to death, won't it be very miserable? And you used to be very good to me, in the future when I have the ability, I will definitely take care of you, don't worry." Lu Chen saw that she was particularly serious, and only felt that it was interesting, and his heart was inexplicably touched, but soon he still smiled and interrupted, and said, Okay, then from today on, I will say that you are a good woman." Exin looked at her with a mixture of annoyance and joy, then looked around and asked, "Where's Atu?" Lu Chen turned back and whistled. After a while, a black shadow sprang out from the mountain forest behind Flying Goose Terrace, and it was Black Dog. Seeing Exin standing beside Lu Chen from afar, Atsu immediately shook its head and wagged its tail, and quickly ran over. Exin also let out a crisp laughter, and greeted it with a chuckle. On the way, she hugged Atsu, who was rushing over, and hugged it in her arms. "Woof, woof, 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 woof," Atsu barked repeatedly, looking very excited and happy, probably because it had not seen Exin for a while. On this mountain of Kunlun, the people who could really make it feel close to, and the people who could completely let down its guard, were only Lu Chen and Exin in front of it. Exin was also very happy. She hugged Atsu, and then pressed her hands hard on its back and head, as if she wanted to double what she had not seen in these days. She laughed, and suddenly screamed. It turned out that Atsu was too excited, and kept jumping, and accidentally crushed Exin. Exin patted Atu's head. Although Atu's current appearance was extremely ferocious and hideous, in her eyes, he was no different from the black puppy from back then. She even laughed and shouted, "Oh, stinky Atsu, why are you so heavy now? How many kilograms have you gained?" "Woof woof woof woof." Atsu kept rubbing against her, and its tail was also wagging wildly, as if it was venting the joy in its heart. After a while, the person and the dog calmed down a little. Exin smiled and patted Atsu's head, then turned to Lu Chen and said with a smile, "Brother Lu, do you think Atsu has grown a lot? Grown up?" Lu Chen was a little surprised, but after hearing what she said, he took a closer look and really felt that Atsu seemed to have grown a lot. Then he seemed to think of something, and his face became slightly solemn, but soon returned to normal. He smiled and said, "It should be. This stupid dog doesn't know anything. It only thinks about eating." After a while, Exin finally came over and said to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, are you really okay now?" Lu Chen said, "Yes, I'm fine. Don't worry." "Oh, I'll tell Sister Su about it," Exin said with a smile. Lu Chen looked at Exin and suddenly thought of something else. Back in the dark grave, Exin's master, Dongfang Tao, suddenly appeared there, and seemed to have a fierce fight with the mysterious corpse watcher. His eyes flickered slightly, and he asked Exin, "Oh right, you always ask me, how have you been recently?" Exin said, "Pretty good." Lu Chen smiled and said, "What about your master? Did he teach you any amazing skills recently?" "Not yet. Exian looked a little depressed, and said, Master said that I need to build a solid foundation, and then practice higher-level magic arts. Oh right, he also said that he will take me to a mysterious place soon, to broaden my horizons. Lu Chen's body suddenly shook, and his eyes instantly lit up. Chapter 198. Oh, where are you going? Lu Chen asked Exian. Exian shook her head and said, Master didn't say. He only said that I've never been there before. I also want to know, but I've asked Master several times, but he just smiled and didn't say anything. Lu Chen lowered his head and pondered for a moment. Then his gaze slowly softened, and he smiled somewhat self-deprecatingly. He thought that he had been a shadow for a long time, and stayed in the dark for a long time. It seemed that his whole person had become a little strange. Dongfang Tao had just casually said a few words to his female disciple. Perhaps he really wanted to take Exian to broaden her horizons, but when he heard it, he felt that there was something wrong. Maybe I'm black-hearted. Lu Chen muttered in a low voice. Exian, who was next to him, didn't hear it clearly. She asked curiously, Brother Lu, what did you say? Lu Chen shook his head and said with a smile, nothing. That's right, this Kunlun mountain range is so big. Perhaps there are many magical and magnificent paradises that we haven't heard of. Not to mention other things, just the 4 strange peaks floating in the sky are rare in the world. If we can go up and take a look, it will also be a kind of blessing. Exian laughed and said, Brother Lu, you're right. But I think it's most likely impossible between the clouds in the sky. Our sect has long had a rule that only Yuanying Jinren can set foot on the 4 strange peaks of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. I'm still far from that. Lu Chen's heart suddenly moved. He asked Exian, speaking of which, I heard that there are also exceptions. Exian was startled. Brother Lu, you mean? Lu Chen looked around and saw that there was no one around. He lowered his voice and said, It's Hakushin Jinkuan's disciple. Hakushin Jinkuan has 3 disciples. His eldest disciple is our sect leader, Reverend Idle Month, who is at the Yuanying realm. As for the other 2, Shuxian is said to be Jin Dan Friar, and White Lotus is even worse. She is about the same as us. But I heard that these 2 fellow sect members without nascent soul realm cultivation often go up to the winter peak between the clouds in the sky to cultivate. Exian was stunned for a moment and suddenly became nervous. She grabbed Lu Chen's hand and said to him seriously, Hey, Brother Lu, are you stupid? How could such words be spoken so carelessly? That's a perfected cultivator, a soul formation perfected cultivator, brother. Lu Chen looked at her and suddenly smiled. He nodded and said, I understand. Don't worry. Exian then let out a sigh of relief. But very quickly, it seemed that she was also a little lost in thought by Lu Chen's words. She thought for a moment and then slowly said, I think, it's probably because of perfected cultivator's face. Lu Chen coughed and said seriously, Friend Exian, I understand what you mean. You are saying that although the Kunlun party has strict rules, but at most it can only restrict Yuanying perfected cultivators. For soul formation perfected cultivators, these rules are useless. Hey! Exian jumped up in fright. Her face turned pale. She stammered, Brother Lu, you can't speak carelessly. I don't mean that. Lu Chen laughed out loud, but halfway through, his laughter suddenly stopped. He was holding his chest with his hand, but there was a trace of pain on his face. Exian was shocked again. She hurriedly supported him and said, Brother Lu, are you okay? Just as she finished speaking, her body suddenly trembled, as if she suddenly thought of something. She instantly turned pale with fright and said in shock, Aya, could it be that you said something bad about Hakushin Jinkuan just now, and he sensed it, so he gave you a punishment? Lu Chen rolled his eyes. After taking 2 deep breaths, the pain on his face subsided and his body stabilized. Then, he angrily hit Exian's head and said, Nonsense, do you think that perfected monarchs are immortals? There are so many people in the world who know of them. Who knows how many people have called out their names all day long. If they were to investigate them one by one, then perfected spirit-severing monarchs wouldn't be able to do anything else. They would just be annoyed to death every day. Exin was stunned for a moment, and said, "If you put it like that, it seems to make a little bit of sense." Nonsense. Exin suddenly looked a lot braver. After sticking out her tongue, her expression also became a lot smarter. After thinking for a moment, she mysteriously pulled Lu Chen and said in a low voice, "If that's really the case, it seems that the two disciples of Hakushin Jinkuan have indeed violated the sect rules." Lu Chen said, "I said it just now, but there are so many people in the Kunlun party, but no one has come out to say anything." Exin shrugged and said, "Brother Lu, you are also talking nonsense. Who would dare to say anything? That is a perfected spirit-severing monarch. Besides, even the current sect leader, perfected Idol Month, is also his eldest disciple. Those who still dare to say something like that are either stupid or out of their minds." Lu Chen looked at her and said with a smile, "Hey, you are not stupid recently." "I have never been stupid," Exin said indignantly. Lu Chen also ignored Exin's protest and said to himself, "It seems that being a disciple of a perfected spirit-severing monarch is still more comfortable. I am naturally much stronger than others." "Yes," Exin said enviously, and then teased Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, our Kunlun party has two perfected monarchs. In addition to Hakushin Jinkuan, there is also perfected monarch Tianlan, who has not yet had a disciple. If you have some sort of fortuitous encounter and are able to become his disciple, then wouldn't it be great? At that time, wouldn't you be able to get whatever you want and ascend to whatever peak you want?" Lu Chen thought for a moment, and said with a nod, "You are right. How about this, when I become his disciple in the future, I will not care about the sect rules, and secretly take you to the strange peaks in the sky to see the scenery, okay?" Exin was laughing so hard that she was rocking back and forth. Her giggles were like the crisp sound of wind chimes. She pointed at Lu Chen and laughed so hard that she couldn't say anything. After a long while, she finally caught her breath, but she was still laughing. She smiled at Lu Chen and said, Okay. Anyway, I don't think I'll have much chance to become a nascent soul Taoist master in this lifetime. When I'm really old, I'll wait for you to take me up." Lu Chen spread out his hands and said, "Why do you have to wait so long? Just wait for a few years. When I become successful and famous, I will take you up to play." Wahaha! Exin laughed so hard that she bent over, laughing so hard that she could not catch her breath. She pointed at Lu Chen and shook her head desperately, then nodded repeatedly, and said, Okay, Brother Lu, I am counting on you." Lu Chen chuckled. For some reason, he suddenly felt his mood lighten up. He felt that the sky was clear, that the green mountains were black, and that the sea of clouds was magnificent. The future seemed to have suddenly become beautiful. He smiled and looked into the distance. The mountain wind blew over the two smiling people, and lifted their clothes. The branch of Hakushin Jinkuan holds the power, and is the strongest branch in the Kunlun party. They have been arrogant for a long time. Everyone, you and I are all disciples of Kunlun. What do we rely on for 5,000 years? It is not the number of geniuses, not the number of people, and not the occasional appearance of a perfected lord of Huashan realm. The biggest reason why the Kunlun party can be passed down to this day is because of the various rules passed down by the ancestors of the past generations. For thousands of years, how many famous sects in the cultivation world of the central region have risen and fallen, rising and falling, have we not seen enough? Why is it that only our Kunlun party is prosperous? Rules. There is only one word, rules. A deafening voice echoed in a secret quiet room under the eldest prince of Baichao Tang. Someone was speaking passionately, and the others were listening carefully, nodding, or silent. There were 5 people in the quiet room, and all of them were Yuan Yingzhenren. Even in a first-class sect like the Kunlun party, these 5 people were a powerful force that should not be underestimated. The two sitting in the front were naturally the two Jinren of Baichao Tang. The one who spoke passionately just now was Jinren Mingzhu, while Jinren Qiandang, who was sitting in the main seat, smiled and nodded calmly, as if he did not feel that Jinren Mingzhu's words were disrespectful to Hakushin Jinkuan. Apart from the two of them, the other three Yuanying Jinren had different expressions, and their expressions were slightly complicated. Jinren Qiandang's bright eyes swept across the crowd, and then he smiled and said, "What junior brother Mingzhu just said, I believe all of you have the same feeling these days. Let's not talk about other things, but in the supreme forbidden area of the vault of heaven and clouds, only Jinren Yuanying can enter. Now that Zhuxian and White Lotus have set foot on the winter peak, it is indeed inappropriate." A fair-skinned man sitting on his right nodded and said, "Senior brother Qiandang is right. I, Guangyang, feel the same. In fact, it's not just us. As far as I know, there are many Yuanying Jinren on the spring and autumn peaks who are dissatisfied with this. It's just that the other side is too powerful, so no one dares to voice their anger." "That's right." At this time, another Yuanying Jinren sitting opposite to Jinren Guangyang said, "But there's nothing we can do about it. Now that Hakushin Jinkuan is guarding the sect, and the Jinren sect master is his disciple, the Bai clan's henchmen are everywhere in the sect, and we can't do anything about it." Taoist Master Qiandang smiled and said, "Even so, it doesn't mean that there's no chance of a turnaround. After all, this foundation is passed down by the patriarch. As disciples of Kunlun sect, it's our duty to clean up the roots." As he said this, he turned to look at the Yuanying Jinren who had been sitting in the last row with his head bowed. He asked with a smile, "What do you think, junior brother Muyuan?" The last Yuanying Jinren slowly raised his head. His expression was solemn and his brows were tightly furrowed, but he didn't say anything for a while. The quiet room seemed to have fallen into a moment of silence. The gazes of the other Yuanying Jinren Qiandang quickly fell on Masato Kihara. The air was silent, but it seemed to have suddenly become heavy. After a while, Masato Kihara looked at Jinren Qiandang and said, "Senior brother Qiandang, I have something to say first." "Please speak, junior brother. I understand all of your intentions. I'm sure all of you are aware of my current situation. It can't get any worse. If there's a chance, it's not a bad idea to take a gamble. But..." He raised his brows and said in a low voice, "I'll say it again. If true Lord Tianlan doesn't personally promise me, I won't participate in this matter." Chapter 199. Enlightened Master Qiandang furrowed his brows and revealed an awkward expression. The enlightened masters next to him also fell silent. The atmosphere in the quiet room was somewhat stiff. After a moment, Masato Kihara softened his tone and looked at enlightened Master Qiandang with a sincere expression. "Senior brother Qiandang, you and I have known each other for many years. Although we aren't friends of life and death, we should at least know each other well. I'm sure you know what kind of person I am." Enlightened Master Qiandang slowly nodded. Masato Kihara looked around at the crowd and continued in a low voice, "Everyone here is a discerning person, so there's no need for pleasantries. The Kuenji branch is extremely powerful while my Tieji branch is in decline. Under normal circumstances, not to mention that we don't dare to get involved, even if the Kuenji's power struggle turns the world upside down, my Tieji branch may not be able to do anything. Including me, there are only 4 Yuanying enlightened masters in our Tieji branch. Apart from my disciple Su Qingjun, there are almost no outstanding talents among the disciples below the Yuanying stage." He said indifferently, "Everyone, you've dragged me into this matter for the sake of these 4 old bones of mine. However, this is no trivial matter. Once it starts, there is no way out. This is tantamount to me betting all of the legacies passed down by Patriarch Tailuo. I really can't afford to lose in this matter." Enlightened Master Qiandang pondered for a moment and suddenly said, "Junior brother Kihara, since you are so frank, then I won't be polite and will tell you something unpleasant." Masato Kihara said, "Senior brother, please go ahead." Enlightened Master Qiandang said, "As you said before, the Tieji branch has indeed declined in recent years. But if we continue to play it safe, we may be able to linger on for some time, but I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to prosper in the foreseeable future. I wonder if you have any objections to what I have said?" Kihara Jinren remained silent. He did not agree, nor did he agree. Taoist Master Qian Deng didn't care about this. He only looked at him deeply and said, "Junior brother, let me give you a word of advice. Instead of dragging on and being half dead, why not fight with all his might? Martial Uncle Tianlan has already issued a decree earlier. As long as you, Taiji, contribute to this important matter, once it succeeds, you will definitely be rewarded. Regardless of other things, the four of you, Jinren Yuanying, will definitely be arranged to cultivate in the sky." Masato Kihara's expression changed slightly as he gritted his teeth. In the Kunlun party, there had long been a sect rule, which was that those who were not in the Yuanying realm were not allowed to go up to the four strange peaks between the clouds in the sky to train. But in reality, because the difference in strength was too great, those who could enter the four floating peaks of spring, summer, autumn, and winter were all disciples of Kuanji, and the only four spiritual masters of Taiji had never been able to go up. Of course, this was unfair, but no one in the Kunlun party had ever dared to openly mention this matter. The reason was actually very simple. Needless to say anything else, one only needed to look at the background of the two supreme deity transformation stage sovereigns in the sect. "I understand what you're saying," Masato Kihara said to Taoist Master Qian Deng, "but this matter is of great importance, and I can't be careless. Hakushin Jinkuan's lineage is powerful and has countless henchmen in the sect. It won't be easy to become enemies with them." He lightly pointed in a certain direction and said, "Let's not talk about other things. Even if we do well, Hakushin Jinkuan is still on the winter peak. How can we solve this? This matter must be personally handled by perfected Lord Tianlan, only then we have a little chance. If he doesn't appear, we, Taiji, will not get involved in this muddy water." Qian Deng gently exhaled and said, "I understand what you mean." Masato Kihara slightly lowered her head and said, "Senior brother, please don't blame me for my rudeness." Taoist Master Qian Deng waved his hand and said, "It's human nature. Don't mind it." He paused for a moment and then said, "I received the news yesterday. A few days before the next full moon, Uncle Master Tianlan will rush back from Zhengxianmeng to participate in the annual sect council. Let's see when the time comes. Maybe he will talk to you himself." Masato Kihara slightly bowed and nodded. "Thank you for your understanding, senior brother. Thank you for perfected Lord Tianlan's kindness." Taoist Master Qian Deng looked at the crowd and suddenly raised his voice a little. He said, "Everyone, I've already told you about this important matter. I'm sure everyone is aware of the cause of this matter. When ancestor Tianhong was still alive, everyone in the sect knew that the most beloved disciple of the founder was Uncle Master Tianlan. Even the Taoist name, Tian, was passed on to him. The meaning couldn't be clearer. He wanted Uncle Master Tianlan to lead the Kunlun party and inherit the position of sect leader. However, things took a turn for the worse. Ancestor Tianhong passed away unexpectedly, leaving only Uncle Master Bai Chen and Tianlan. In the end, it was Hakushin Jinkuan who inherited all the legacies of the sect, while Uncle Master Tianlan was forced to Zhengxianmeng to fight to the death with those fierce and ruthless devil cult monsters. I don't need to say more about the meaning of this. Taoist Master Qian Deng sighed and then said, "However, many years later, Hakushin Jinkuan passed the position of sect leader to his eldest disciple. Since then, his power has grown. Now, the discipline of the sect has been corrupted and there are many villains and spies. However, Idle Month and the others are powerless. They can't resist the strong enemies and revitalize the sect. Internally, many mediocre villains are raised to gain prestige, causing the reputation of the Kunlun party to decline day by day. What's funny is that Idle Month and the others think that the sect is thriving and boast about it. They are shameless. Uncle Master Tianlan once said to me that although he is indifferent and doesn't care about fame and benefits, he can't sit back and watch when the sect is gradually falling into a dangerous situation. Otherwise, how can he face ancestor Tianhong after 100 years? He also won't have the face to face the founders of the Kunlun party. Set things right and clean up the roots. This is what Uncle Master Tianlan wants to do. At the end of his speech, Qian Deng's expression was solemn, but he said it resolutely and decisively. Immediately, the expressions of the people around him tightened and they all nodded in agreement. The days when Su Qingjun wasn't on the Fian Terrace seemed particularly cold and cheerless. However, perhaps because he was already used to this kind of loneliness, Lu Chen didn't feel sad. Instead, he felt a lot more at ease. However, after midnight, Lu Chen led the Atsu sect down the Nanlu Mountain Road and went straight to Kunwa City. When he came to Kunwa City, he actually only had one place to go most of the time, to look for Old Ma in the Black Hill Pavilion. This time, when he passed by the place where the murder happened on the street, he looked a little tired. That house was no longer available for rent. After all, someone had died in the courtyard, and there were actually a few unfamiliar men guarding the door and the house, preventing outsiders from entering or leaving at will. Perhaps there were some bad-tempered cultivators who wanted to cause trouble, but soon, everyone saw or knew that these guards were all disciples of the Kunlun party. Most of the individual cultivators in Kunwa City didn't know who the person who died in the door was, so there were all kinds of guesses. Some of them even made people laugh until they scratched their heads. For example, the person who died in the house was an extremely powerful spiritual master Yuanying. What kind of secret technique was he hiding in the city? Or perhaps, someone thought that a genius of the Kunlun party that only appeared once in 100 years lived here and was afraid that he would be discovered and died prematurely, so he hid here. However, these words were actually considered polite. The most outrageous thing was that some people even said that there were women's clothes in this mysterious house. Perhaps they were the old lovers of the spiritual master Idol Month, the current spiritual master of the Kunlun party. This kind of words could be said to be malicious, but of course, it was also possible that some people were really stupid and wanted to discredit spiritual master Idol Month. Of course, Lu Chen knew what happened in the house, but he naturally didn't know some specific details. One of the reasons he came to Kunwa City today was to ask Old Ma about what happened that day in detail. But this time, the most important thing for Lu Chen in Kunwa City was still Atsu. Although Atsu's appearance didn't seem to have changed much, Lu Chen knew that under this black dog's fur, signs of valiance and ferocity had gradually begun to show. In any case, it was no longer suitable to keep it on the mountain of Kunlun. Otherwise, in the future, Atsu might turn the mountain upside down. As for those powerful Yuanying spiritual masters of the Kunlun party, if they wanted to deal with such a black dog, they had almost endless powerful methods. Lu Chen didn't even dare to think about what would happen to Atsu if it really caused trouble in the future. He took one last look at the house guarded by the disciples of the Heavenly Soldier Hall of the Kunlun party, then left with Atsu, heading to the shabby and deserted Black Hill Pavilion. Old Ma was very happy to see Lu Chen, but after hearing Lu Chen's instructions, he suddenly looked embarrassed and said, "Lu Chen, you see, now that everything here is under repair, we don't have much money left. As for me, I actually don't have much interest in raising a dog, so," Lu Chen said indifferently, "I'll pay." Old Ma suddenly stood up and said righteously, "So, of course, this dog can stay. I will take care of it." Lu Chen smiled and didn't care. He just said, "In fact, you don't have to take care of it for too long. You just need to feed it something every day. Also, don't let it run out to the streets casually. It might cause trouble if it's not handled properly." "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" Old Ma looked at Lu Chen with some doubts and said, "Isn't this an ordinary dog? What kind of trouble can there be?" Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "This matter is settled. In short, take good care of it for the next few days. When the matter is settled, live until a few days before the night of the full moon. I will find a time to send it away, the farther the better." Old Ma frowned and suddenly looked at Lu Chen. He asked, "What do you want to do when the night of the full moon arrives?" Chapter 200. Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "Isn't it about the traitor of the evil cult?" Old Ma pointed at Atsu and said, "What does that have to do with it? Why must it be sent away before the night of the full moon?" Our top priority right now is to find the traitor of the evil cult. At this critical moment, do you have to divert your attention to send away a dog? He paused and looked at Lu Chen with a frown. I think you're a little strange today. Did something happen? Lu Chen shook his head and said, nothing, I'm fine. Old Ma stared at him for a moment, then nodded and said, you're an old man, I won't say anything unnecessary. Anyway, be careful. Lu Chen stood up and patted him on the shoulder, then turned around and walked towards the gate. Atsu wanted to follow him, but Lu Chen stopped it. After thinking for a while, he brought it to the courtyard and gave it something to eat. He stroked Atsu's back and whispered something to it. He didn't know if Atsu understood, but it just sat on the ground and didn't follow. When Lu Chen walked through the narrow passageway, he looked back and could still see the black dog quietly sitting in the quiet courtyard, staring at his back. There was a faint light flashing in its only eye. Lu Chen laughed and waved at Atsu. Atsu swung its tail and barked at him. Su Qingjun returned to the mountain after a few days. When Lu Chen saw her, she was walking over from the mountain path. Her face looked a little haggard and her expression was a little heavy. However, when she saw Lu Chen's figure, she still revealed a trace of a smile. She quickened her footsteps and walked over. She sized him up and said, "Are you all right?" Lu Chen loosened his muscles and said with a smile, "I'm fine, I'm fine." Su Qingjun showed a gratified smile, then a little apologetic and said, "I should have come back to see you earlier, but I couldn't leave home." Lu Chen waved his hand and said with a smile, "It's okay, I'm fine." But what happened at home? Did something urgent happen? Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment and then said softly, "There's no need to hide it from you. My brother, Su Mo, had a relapse after returning home that night. He was delirious, and his mouth was full of nonsense. His condition was terrible, as if," she didn't finish her words, "as if she didn't know what to say. She probably couldn't bear to use the word idiot on her brother." Lu Chen said and didn't say anything else. He just accompanied her to walk around the Flying Goose Terrace. They gradually walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the vast sea of clouds in front of them. As the mountain breeze blew, Su Qingjun sighed and said, "My parents have always loved my brother the most, so they were naturally heartbroken to see him in such a miserable state. Then they went around looking for people to treat him, and I also had to help them ask for help. As for you, I was also a little worried that you would also be in the same situation when you went back. That would be terrible. But I really couldn't leave in that situation, so I had to ask younger sister Exin to help me see you. But when I heard that you were safe and sound, I was relieved." Lu Chen nodded and said, "I'm fine, you don't need to worry." After he said that, he muttered to himself for a moment, then glanced at Su Qingjun and said, "Right, I heard something else happened a few days ago. That He Yi's brother, He Gang, met with an accident in Kunwa City." Su Qingjun smiled bitterly and said, "Yes, it did happen. In fact, this is one of the reasons why I can't return to the mountain. Originally, when my brother was tossed around like that, my Su family was furious and we were unwilling to let He Yi go, but this incident happened. In the end, it seemed like overnight, that senior martial brother he became the victim. Everyone thought that our Su family paid for the murderer to take revenge." Lu Chen thought for a moment then asked Su Qingjun, "It really wasn't done by your Su family?" Su Qingjun rolled her eyes at him and said angrily, "Of course it wasn't. Didn't I just say it?" Lu Chen laughed and said, I'm just joking. But you have to say, when I heard about this, my first reaction was indeed to think of your family. This matter is too coincidental. Now, many people in the sect are talking about it in private, and they all think it was done by your family." With a gloomy expression, Su Qingjun said somewhat helplessly, "Who said it wasn't? It's a pity that we can't come out and explain it. This matter is quite strange, but senior martial brother he lost his younger brother, and he has Dukanjinren and the sect head standing behind him. Now, it's them who are in the right. Our Su family really can't vent our anger, so we can only swallow it for the time being." Lu Chen looked at the woman beside him and saw that there was a slight annoyance on her face. Her chest was heaving up and down, probably because she was still angry in her heart. But when the light from the sky shone down and the cool breeze blew past her temples, her beautiful hair fluttering in the wind, she was still as elegant and beautiful as before. There was even a feeling that after being separated for so many days, she seemed to be even more beautiful than before. No one spoke at the edge of the cliff for a while. It was quiet like a paradise. Su Qingjuan's mood gradually calmed down. After a while, she suddenly blushed and said to Lu Chen somewhat apologetically, "I'm sorry. I originally wanted to come back and see how your injuries are, but in the end, it turned into me complaining to you." Lu Chen smiled and said, "No matter, I'm fine, it doesn't matter if I listen. But you don't need to be too angry." After saying that, he paused for a moment and said again, "Then this matter, you're just going to let it go like this?" Su Qingjun suddenly sneered and said, "Of course not, I only have this one younger brother. He was muddle-headed and was messed up like this. Whether he will recover in the future is still unknown. How can I let this matter go like this? Besides, I also heard rumors that he's senior martial brother. He is very sad about his younger brother's death. Although he didn't say anything excessive, but I guess with his personality, I'm afraid that he won't be willing to let this matter go. In short, no matter what, our Su family and his surname this enmity is formed." Su Qingjun said indifferently. Lu Chen frowned and said, "It sounds really troublesome." Su Qingjun said, "It doesn't matter if it's troublesome or not. Previously, our Su family temporarily endured it out of consideration for the sect master and the other big shots. We didn't want to cause any misunderstandings. But if senior martial brother he really wants to shed all pretense of cordiality and fight, our Su family can't possibly be afraid of him." When saying this, Su Qingjuan's expression was stern, but there was also a trace of pride. She was probably a big family that had been passed down for many years, so she should have a bit of confidence and confidence. Lu Chen nodded and echoed a few words. Su Qingjun shook her head and said, "Actually, this matter is like this now, but the most hateful thing is that person who plotted in the dark. He found this opportunity to deliberately provoke hatred between us. It's really hateful." As she said this, she gritted her teeth and looked at the sea of clouds in the distance. She said to Lu Chen, "If I can find this person in the future, I will definitely kill him." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then he smiled and nodded, saying, "You're right. This person is too evil. He should be killed." When the sky turned dark, Su Qingjun had already returned to her cave to rest. The Fian Terrace was peaceful. A bright moon rose in the night sky and sprinkled its moonlight down. Atu's figure was nowhere to be seen in the wooden hut, making Lu Chen feel a bit more empty than before. He wondered if Atu, who was in Kunwa City at the foot of the mountain, was also looking at the moon like this. He stared at the bright moon in the night sky and frowned slightly as if he was thinking about something. But soon, his expression suddenly changed. He sat up and looked outside the window. Sure enough, after a moment, a petite figure appeared in his field of vision. Lu Chen sighed and didn't get up. He just looked at the figure outside the window and said, "What are you doing here again?" That person came closer and the moonlight illuminated her face. It was White Lotus. This young girl with an otherworldly beauty looked especially noble and beautiful under the moonlight, as if she was a fairy that descended from the sky. She didn't stand on ceremony with Lu Chen. She walked over and put her hand on the windowsill, then she directly jumped up and sat on it. She then looked down at the room and was suddenly startled. She said, "Where's Atsu?" "I drove him away," Lu Chen said faintly. "That stupid dog is too stupid. It's annoying to look at." White Lotus snorted. Her face showed that she obviously didn't believe his words. But from this angle, Lu Chen suddenly discovered that the collar of White Lotus's clothes today was very high up, just covering most of her neck. As if she sensed Lu Chen's gaze, White Lotus smiled and reached out to touch her neck, said, "Thanks to you, that wound is very strange and it won't heal for a long time. Sometimes, I really wonder what your identity is. You always use these indescribable demonic methods." Lu Chen sat up straighter, his face revealed a solemn expression and said to White Lotus, I am not an evil sect spy. White Lotus snorted. Although she looked somewhat disdainful, for some reason she seemed to believe his words. Lu Chen looked at the dark night outside, shook his head and said to White Lotus, I say, you have nothing better to do than to run around all day. First, is it because your omnipotent master doesn't care about you? Second, this mountain still has a curfew. If you are seen by the patrolling disciples, wouldn't it be embarrassing? White Lotus' face was full of disdain, said, First, my master usually doesn't care about me. He has a lot of things to do and can't wait to cultivate every day. Second, curfew is a fart, sect rules are a fart. I am the direct disciple of a Huashan true monarch, not to mention those trash can't catch me, even if they see me, what can they do to me? Lu Chen was silent, then smiled bitterly and said, You are so young but you can see it clearly. White Lotus sat high up on the window sill, looked down at him and said, Nonsense, people in this world are divided into high and low, how can those without ability sit on the same level as us? Why are you pretending to be a saint? Lu Chen smiled and didn't say anything. He turned to look at the moon in the sky. The moon tonight was bright and full, illuminating a large part of the dark night sky. There were only 7 days left until the next full moon night. Chapter 201. Under the moonlight, that young girl sat on the windowsill of the wooden house with her feet dangling in the air, one hand on the windowsill, the other on her lap. The night breeze blew over faintly, ruffling the corner of her clothes. Occasionally her feet would gently kick a few times, as if lingering with the wind, and also like a child suddenly floating up, just for fun. On her lips, there was a sudden smile, light but gentle, just like what a 10-year-old girl should have. The night was deep, the moonlight was cold. For some reason, she still had no intention of leaving. She suddenly quietened down, not asking Lu Chen about Atsu's whereabouts, nor did she speak ill of Lu Chen. In that instant, Lu Chen suddenly had a very strange feeling that White Lotus was just sitting there playing. But of course Lu Chen would not really treat this girl as an ordinary 10-year-old girl. What a joke! With the vicious methods that she had displayed previously, Lu Chen felt that if his cultivation was slightly lacking, he would not be able to see the moon tonight. But this stalemate did not seem to be a solution. White Lotus did not seem to care at all, but this place was Lu Chen's wooden house, at least Lu Chen still wanted to sleep tonight. With an exceptionally dangerous girl like White Lotus sitting on the windowsill, no matter how brave Lu Chen was, he felt that he did not dare to close his eyes. So, Lu Chen felt that he still had to speak to White Lotus, thinking that since everyone had nothing to say, wouldn't it be best to go back to their own homes and sleep? When he was about to speak, he suddenly heard a low humming sound coming from White Lotus's mouth, and slowly, she started to sing a little song, the crescent moon, seeing the acacia. Red clothes dressing for whom? Yeah, time passes like water, white hair flustered. Seeing the red makeup in the morning, separated by 1,000 mountains at dusk. Yeah, this song was short and simple, and the meaning of the words was graceful. However, when she sang it, it carried a trace of loneliness. She was like a lonely woman that was filled with deep thoughts, and it was completely unlike the feeling she should have at her age. But in the eyes of Lu Chen, who had seen White Lotus's vicious methods, he did not see White Lotus as a little girl. But even so, when he heard this song, he still felt a sudden and inexplicable trance. The moonlight shone on Bai Lian's beautiful face, making her seem like an otherworldly fairy. Her voice also seemed to reverberate through the 9 heavens. Her voice was light and translucent, almost reaching a state of perfection. Anyone who heard it would immediately be immersed in it, as if they were looking at the woman in the song that they longed for. The night was dim, the cold wind was silent, her voice gradually faded, and then disappeared. Lu Chen suddenly said, "This song, where did you learn it from?" White Lotus turned her head to look at him, and said, "Why do you ask?" After a pause, she asked again, "How was my singing, was it good?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, but still nodded, and said, "It was really good, your voice is extraordinary, this little song from your mouth can be said to be a little more celestial." Ha! White Lotus giggled, as if she was suddenly very happy, and then said to herself, I said, a genius like me, how can there be anything that I can't do well, even if it's singing, it must be the best. Lu Chen said softly, this song sounds a little familiar, as if I have heard it before, can you tell me? White Lotus laughed, and then said, no. Lu Chen was startled, and said, why not? White Lotus said, because I'm happy, I can do whatever I want, I don't want to tell you, so I won't tell you. Lu Chen was speechless. White Lotus looked at him, seemed to be a little happy, and then said with a little pride, come on, you are lucky enough today, let me tell you, in this world, no one can hear my song, you are the first, so you can go burn incense in the morning. Lu Chen was moved, looked at White Lotus, and said, if that's the case, then my luck is really good. But I heard you sing so well, no matter who heard it, they will like it, why no one else has heard it? White Lotus' face stiffened, and her eyes slightly drooped, and said, no one is willing to listen, they all hope that they all want me to practice hard and do something big. As she said that, it was as if a stone in her heart had been unintentionally moved. Her expression suddenly relaxed, and she raised her hands to stretch. Her face was languid, and she even tilted her head to one side in a strange manner. She then said, that's why I say, although you're not a good person, and you're full of evil tricks, it seems that only at your place can I sing and scold people freely. Isn't that right, bastard? Lu Chen heard her scolding, but he was not angry. After staring at her for a while, he suddenly shook his head, sighed, and said, you are so young, what kind of life did you live in the past? I just lied to you a few times, and you took it seriously. White Lotus suddenly laughed, and pointed at Lu Chen, shook her head, and said with a smile, look at your silly face, do you still want to comfort me, or save me from the sea of bitterness? Lu Chen shrugged, and did not speak. White Lotus jumped down from the window sill, and waved at Lu Chen, saying, that dog has a secret I want to know. I will definitely come again, don't try to avoid me. As she said this, she walked away with light footsteps. Lu Chen looked at her back, and saw her bouncing footsteps. It seemed that in this cold night, her mood was really much better than before. Probably, right? The day of the sect council on the 15th of this month was getting closer and closer, so recently, the Kunlun party had a more tense and solemn atmosphere. This kind of sect council was also a rule passed down by the ancestors. It was held once a year, to review the past and look forward to the future, and to evaluate many matters, including the redistribution of many resources and spiritual materials within the sect, so it could be said to be the most important matter in the Kunlun party. According to the rules of the Kunlun sect, cultivators above Jin Dan realm could attend the sect council, and all cultivators above Yuanying Jinren must attend. Of course, supreme existences like deity transformation stage Shinran still had special privileges. However, in the past few years, or to be exact, after Jinren Idol Month became the sect leader, Hakushin Jinkun would appear in the sect council every year. On the contrary, because Jinren Tianlan was busy with many things in Zhengxianmeng, he did not come back to participate. Of course, the annual event had to be treated with caution. In the Zhenyang Hall of Tiankuan Peak, some people had already begun to decorate the place. The other big and small matters in the sect had also gradually quietened down, giving way to the most important event of the year. Lu Chen was still quietly waiting for the arrival of the night of the full moon. However, there were still many doubts in Lu Chen's heart about the mysterious spy of the devil cult secretly arranging to meet on the night of the full moon. Not to mention other things, this coincidentally happened on the same day as the most important event of the year in the Kunlun party. Could it be another coincidence? Lu Chen did not believe it. He felt that there might be some strange twists and turns in this matter that he did not know about. However, he still knew nothing about the spy of the devil cult, so the only thing he could do was to wait. At the same time, he was also wondering if he should take advantage of these few days to quickly go down the mountain and take Black Dog away from Kunwa City. At the very least, it would be better to throw him into the forest outside the city. No one could guess the various calculations in Lu Chen's heart. Everyone in the Kunlun party was busy in an orderly manner. Reverend Idlemonth was in charge of the overall situation, but the person in charge of all kinds of miscellaneous and trivial matters was not him, but Reverend Idlemonth's junior brother Zhuoxian. As a Jin Dan friar, the second disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan, and also the sect head Reverend's junior brother, Zhuoxian had a prominent reputation in the Kunlun party for many years. Most of the cultivators, including Reverend Yuanying, treated him with respect. Zhuoxian was also a very capable person. He was smart and capable, and he almost never made a mistake in handling big and small matters. He had always been deeply trusted by both Hakushin Jinkuan and Reverend Idlemonth. On this day, when Zhuoxian walked out of the winter peak above the clouds in the sky, he turned his head and saw the entrance of his third junior sister's cave not far away from his own cave. White Lotus was standing there, looking into the distance in a daze. The wind and snow filled the sky, falling leisurely on the winter peak, which was like a wonder of the world. White Lotus was wearing a white snow mink coat. She stood there like a beautiful statue, so beautiful that it was suffocating. However, Zhuoxian was old and experienced, so he was not too surprised. He only smiled and said, "Junior sister, you're up so early." White Lotus turned around. Her expression was cold, just like the cold snowflakes that filled the sky. She was polite but with a hint of alienation. She bowed to Zhuoxian and said, "Second senior brother, good morning." Zhuoxian nodded and said, "I have to go down the mountain to do something today. I might not come back during the day. Be careful on the mountain alone." White Lotus said, "Little sister knows." "Senior brother, don't worry." Zhuoxian smiled. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he suddenly heard Bai Lian ask, "Second senior, there's something I'd like to ask you." Zhuoxian stopped and said, "Junior sister, please say it." White Lotus said, "I heard that at the foot of the mountain, that is in the sect, there has been a big commotion recently. There is an evil faction spy who infiltrated our Kunlun party and killed an innocent disciple." Zhuoxian was silent for a moment and then nodded and said, "There is indeed such a thing. The disciple who died is called He Changsheng. His ancestor used to be a disciple of our Kunlun party. Later on, his family declined. But when it came to his generation, it looked like he wanted to pull himself together. Unfortunately, he met with such a thing." White Lotus frowned and said, "I think I have heard of He family once before, but I don't have much impression of it. But this evil faction kills people and does evil. Why don't we go and catch them?" Zhuoxian said, "We have already sent people to investigate. Unfortunately, the evil faction is treacherous. So far, we haven't found anything. Instead, we have caused a lot of trouble for no reason." White Lotus looked at him and asked. Zhuoxian was slightly surprised, but then he thought of White Lotus's family background and felt relieved. He said, "It's him. I heard that he hasn't been well recently." White Lotus asked. Zhuoxian looked at White Lotus strangely. Usually, this girl would rarely talk so much. But he still patiently said, "Yes, I heard that in the process of investigating, he had some conflicts with the Su family in Kunwa City. Recently, he was also caught by his master and went back to closed-door training. But how to say it, this time, it seems to be a blessing in disguise, right?" White Lotus was a bit surprised and said, "What do you mean?" Zhuoxian indifferently said, "I heard that the day before yesterday, he used great willpower to subdue his inner demons. In his anger, he turned his grief into great strength and broke through the Jin Dan realm in one fell swoop. Now, he is the same as me, a Jin Dan friar." He looked at White Lotus and faintly smiled. He leisurely said, "At his age, his future is really limitless." Chapter 202. The Kunlun mountain range was majestic and towering on the western continent. It had attracted the attention of countless heroes for thousands of years. At this moment, on a quiet street in Kunwa City, there were two men standing side by side. They were looking at the undulating mountain range from afar. One of them had an ordinary appearance. He was wearing an old robe that had been washed so many times that it had turned white. He looked like a scholar who had studied for many years but had achieved nothing. He looked at the mountain in the distance and suddenly smiled. However, he said to the person beside him, Brother Chen, are they really not your people? The man standing beside him was a familiar face. He was Chen He, who had appeared at the gathering point of the demon sect in the Celestial City. At this moment, Chen He shook his head and said, Brother Fan Tui, it is indeed not us. Actually, when we found out that the reincarnation array had appeared on the Kunlun mountain, we initially thought that it was the work of the spies from the western continent. Elder Gue was worried that you would be too hasty, so he asked me to come and take a look. The man called Fan Tui smiled. His eyes flickered as he said, Thank you for your kind intentions, Elder Gue. I have troubled Brother Chen to make this trip. The two of them turned their backs to the Kunlun mountain and slowly walked along the street. Chen He smiled and said to Fan Tui, Then this matter is a little strange. It is not done by the Western Continent sect, nor is it done by the followers of the Celestial City of the Middle Continent. The other sects are also far away from the Western Continent. It is impossible for them to come all the way here to interfere with the affairs of the Kunlun party. So, who is the one who did this? Fan Tui shrugged and looked helpless. He said, Perhaps it is a spy who was planted into the Kunlun party long ago but has lost contact with us. Ever since the battle in the Barren Valley 10 years ago, the elites of the Holy Sect have suffered heavy losses. We are leaderless and in a mess. Indeed, we cannot contact many people. Chen He nodded and looked at Fan Tui. He said, Brother Fan, the situation over the years has been difficult. However, you have persevered in the Western continent and turned the tide. You have maintained the situation and gradually recuperated to recover your strength. That is why we are where we are today. I admire you very much. Even Elder Gue is full of praise for you. Fan Tui smiled and glanced at Chen He. He did not reply. Chen He continued, But Brother Fan, from the looks of it, our holy church has indeed reached a point where we cannot continue to be in chaos any longer. Someone on Kunlun Mountain who can use such a high-level magical power as the reincarnation formation must be an important figure in our holy church. However, we know nothing about it. Even to this day, we have not been able to contact that person. Furthermore, after the incident, our first reaction was to confirm which sect that person was from. If we don't change this embarrassing situation, our holy church will definitely have no hope of reviving. Fan Tui said, Brother Chen, there's no harm in speaking your mind. Chen He clapped his hands and said, Good, Brother Fan is a straightforward man. Elder Gue thinks highly of Brother Fan's talent and wishes to meet you and appoint you as the vice-hierarch of the holy church. I wonder if Brother Fan is interested. Fan Tui's expression changed slightly. He looked straight at Chen He and said in shock, Deputy Sect Master. Chen He nodded and said, That's right. Fan Tui said, If I remember correctly, even during the Battle of the Barren Valley 10 years ago, our holy church only had the position of elder and not the hierarch. In reality, the Elders' Council of the Holy Church has been discussing matters for many years. The position of hierarch has been empty for hundreds of years, right? That's right. Chen He smiled and nodded. Fan Tui's eyes flashed. Then I don't understand what you mean by that, Brother Chen, he asked. Chen He said calmly, Now is a time of crisis for the Holy Church. 3 of the 5 great elders died in the Barren Valley. A few years ago, Zheng Xianmeng and Fuyunji assassinated us. Elder Feng also died. Now, only Elder Gue is left. Therefore, after much consideration, Elder Gue felt that we should break the old and establish a new one. We should appoint a new hierarch. This way, we can unify the Holy Church and end the current chaotic situation. All the sects in the world will work together to complete the great cause of unifying the 3 realms. Fan Tui took a deep breath. A moment later, he said, Then the position of hierarch, Chen He said directly, Of course it will be Elder Gue. In the entire Holy Church, only he can convince the masses. Fan Tui nodded. After a moment of silence, he suddenly smiled and said to Chen He, If that's the case, your sincerity in giving me the position of deputy hierarch is great. Chen, he said sincerely, Brother Fan, as long as you agree to it, you will be above everyone else. In the future, when the Holy Church succeeds, there will definitely be a place for you in the deity temple. Fan Tui said calmly, Brother Chen, you are too serious. The deity temple is the residence of the elites of our Holy Church. I do not dare to hope for it. It is just that the matter that I have just discussed is of great importance and involves many people. I also have a large group of people under me. It is not something that I can decide on alone. Please allow me to carefully consider this matter for a period of time. Chen He looked forward, his gaze slightly cold. However, he quickly replied politely, of course. The two of them walked forward together. As they looked at the bustling Kunwu city with its buildings, Chen He suddenly said, then what about that person on Kunlun Mountain? Fan Tui pondered for a moment and said, since the reincarnation array has appeared, that person must be a disciple of our Holy Church. As for the fact that we have no contact with either of us, that is probably the result of the chaos in the Holy Church over the past few years. But no matter what, with such a powerful fellow disciple here, we can't just ignore it. Chen He nodded in agreement and said, what Brother Fan said makes sense. That is what I think as well. Furthermore, that person might have done this to spread the news and try to contact us. I think he might be at the Kunlun party. At this point, he did not continue. He simply used his hand to draw a random shape in the air. It looked like a circle, but it was a little curved and undulating. It was unknown what it was. However, Fan Tui clearly recognized this gesture. After looking at it, he nodded and said, yes, I will arrange for someone to go. Chen He glanced at him with a smile and said, Brother Fan, you are indeed impressive. It seems like you can even plant someone into a top-notch sect like the Kunlun party. However, Fan Tui did not look pleased. He only waved his hand and said, this is nothing. Actually, a large sect like the Kunlun party has many disciples. It is not too difficult. However, at most, they will be the lowest-ranking servant disciples. It will be extremely difficult to recruit people from the higher ranks. Chen He smiled and said, no worries. We still have a long way to go. There will be a chance to let them know how powerful our Holy Church is in the future. The two of them smiled at each other, as though they had been good friends for many years. It was as though there were no grudges between them. They walked forward shoulder to shoulder and walked past an inconspicuous and secluded alley on the side of the long street. In the deep and quiet alley, the signboard of the Black Hill Pavilion was still hanging on the door frame. It looked at the quiet alley alone, waiting for a customer that seemed like it would never come. Old Ma sat on his favorite recliner, his eyes half closed as he dozed off. Behind him, in the courtyard of the back hall, separated by a long and narrow passageway, Atsu was quietly lying there. On the other side of the courtyard was a large basin. There were many meat bones in it. Based on its usual habits, the abnormally gluttonous Atsu would have finished the large basin a long time ago. However, for some reason, there was still more than half of the food left in the basin today. Atsu was lying on the ground in the courtyard. Its expression was a little lazy and listless. It was as though even the meat bones had lost their attraction to it. On this quiet and lazy afternoon, it was as though the sunlight was gentle and powerless. At this moment, a soft cry suddenly came from the wall in front of them. Atsu's ears pricked up and it raised its head to look up. Between the green tiles on the wall, the figure of a wildcat appeared. The wildcat carefully walked on the high wall. From time to time, it looked left and right. Suddenly, it saw the large basin of meat bones in the courtyard below. Its eyes suddenly lit up. Atsu looked up at the figure of the wildcat. Its only eye was glimmering. Then, it watched the cat look around for a while. Then, it began to carefully jump down the high wall and walked towards the basin of meat. The wildcat was very careful. It kept looking around and naturally, it soon saw the black dog on the other side of the courtyard. Atsu stared at the wildcat closely, but it did not show any strange movements or expressions. It just slowly stood up. The wildcat was a little scared and took a few steps back. However, when it saw that Atsu did not have any intention of rushing over, it waited for a while and slowly became braver. The fragrant meat bones seemed to be particularly tempting, and it could not help but walk over there. The wildcat stared at Atsu while slowly walking towards the meat bones. The small courtyard was very quiet. There was no sound at all. In the depths of Atsu's eyes, there was a faint beautiful luster that lit up like a green flame. The wildcat knew nothing about it. Most of its attention was now on the basin of meat bones in front of it. After a while, it finally got to the edge of the basin. Then, it could not bear it any longer. It buried its head and took a big bite. However, the wildcat still did not let down its guard. With the meat in its mouth, it immediately looked up at Atsu. However, Atsu still stood in the same place and did not move. The wildcat tried a few times and finally felt relieved. It meowed a few times and was overjoyed to start this hearty meal. Until it buried its head and ate happily, it suddenly found that there was a shadow covering the top of its head. It covered its entire body. In an instant, the fur on the wildcat's body stood up. It raised its head with a scream and saw that a black dog was already standing beside it. A single terrifying eye was flashing with jade-like flames as it stared intently at the wildcat. A terrifyingly large mouth slowly opened halfway, revealing snow-white and sharp fangs. The wildcat screamed in horror and jumped up to escape. However, suddenly, a dog's leg quickly pressed down from mid-air. With just one move, it was firmly pressed to the ground. The next moment, the dark shadow completely drowned and swallowed the wildcat. Chapter 203. There were many odd-job disciples in Kunlun Mountain. They were at the bottom of the hierarchy in this famous sect. They did most of the hard work, but they only received negligible rewards. What they hoped for was a very big dream. Most people were like this, but only a very small number of people could reach the sky in a single bound. To some extent, Lu Chen was actually one of them. However, there were not many people like Lu Chen. In the fragrance garden where he had worked before, there were still countless odd-job disciples who were still struggling to survive, unable to make a name for themselves. Zhang Ji was such an ordinary odd-job disciple. He had been in the Kunlun party for many years, but there had been no improvement. In the beginning, Zhang Ji had actually worked hard, diligently doing all the work that he could do, tenaciously persevering to do his best in the hard work, but even so, there were no opportunities falling on his head from the sky. Therefore, Zhang Ji gradually slacked off. He had been dissatisfied, wronged, and angry, but he was just an ordinary person. Other than his average ability, he was actually very afraid of death. So in the end, Zhang Ji finally became a wily old fox, and not the kind of madman that occasionally appeared. Because he had been in the Kunlun Mountain for a long time, and because he was experienced enough in the fragrance garden, in general, Zhang Ji's life among the odd-job disciples was not bad. However, a few days ago, he was at a disadvantage in a dispute with a person called He Changsheng, and he was knocked unconscious on the spot. However, the main character of this dispute was not Zhang Ji, nor was it He Changsheng. In fact, it was a few high-ranking aristocratic children, and the matter was later left unsettled. Zhang Ji was very angry when he was at a disadvantage, but one day after a while, he heard something: He Changsheng had died. He died very suddenly, inexplicably, and it was said that he died very miserably. Zhang Ji didn't see it with his own eyes, but he heard all kinds of descriptions from the people around him. At first, he was happy with the misfortune of others, but after a long time, when he calmed down, he also felt sad for the death of a rabbit. Moreover, they heard that the murderer was very likely to be a sorcerer from the devil cult, which was even more inconceivable. To be honest, Zhang Ji had known He Changsheng for a long time. Although their relationship was ordinary, he really did not think that this person would have anything to do with the devil cult. After a period of time, when he had almost forgotten about this matter, another person named He Yi brought him over and interrogated him for a long time. What did He Changsheng do? Why was the sect still investigating this murder case after he had been dead for so long? Zhang Ji didn't know why, but when he was confused, he actually felt a little jealous and envious. He knew that if he died in an accident, it would never attract the attention of the Kunlun party. Not many people would even pay attention to it. After all, they were all odd job disciples. Zhang Ji was such an ordinary person, a selfish person with some human emotions. He had dreams before, fantasizing that one day he would become an immortal and his name would shake the world. Of course, these things seemed to be impossible now. But, who didn't want to be different? Well, if there was a chance to come. Every day when Zhang Ji woke up and went out, he would look at the house that he Changsheng once lived in, which was now empty and abandoned. Then he would have a thought in his heart, thinking that probably now, other than those who wanted to catch the evil sect's evil people, he was probably the only one left who still remembered he Changsheng. This was really a very strange thing. Until that morning, when there were still 6 days before the sect council meeting, Zhang Ji did not walk out of the door like usual. Until noon, when a passerby noticed something was wrong and reported, the guarding disciples who rushed over then discovered that Zhang Ji had taken the same path as he Changsheng. He was dead in his own house. Heard that his death was quite tragic. Heard that the house was full of blood. Also heard that this time it was done by the damn devil cult sorcerer again. Not sure if the devil cult of the 3 realms paid special attention to the Kunlun party, maybe they should. But now that the sect council meeting was about to be held, and He Changsheng's murder case had not been solved, the tragedy of killing Zhang Ji happened again, without a doubt, in front of everyone in Kunlun Mountain. It gave the Kunlun party another hard slap in the face. The devil cult's savagery was outrageous. The one who suffered the most from this slap was, of course, the leader of the Kunlun party, Reverend Idle Month. As the leader of the sect, such things happened continuously. If it happened once, it could be said to be an accident, but if it happened again, it could really make people doubt his ability. Therefore, Reverend Idle Month was furious. His angry roar in the Zhenyang Hall of Tian Kun Peak could be heard not only from outside the hall, but even the people at the foot of the mountain could hear it. However, although Reverend Idle Month was extremely angry, there were some things that could not be changed by his will, and some people were not afraid of his anger. A few Yuanying realm Zenrins led by Bai Chao Tang were very dissatisfied with this matter. They said bluntly that the devil cult was so rampant, could people still live in the dignified Kunlun in the future? Did everyone still want their face? Why couldn't they catch the murderer after so long? Was it because the murderer was too cunning, or were they incompetent? These questions were like knives stabbing at Reverend Idle Month, making him tired of dealing with them. He was indeed unreasonable in this matter. No matter what, as the leader of a sect, it was his natural responsibility to protect his weak disciples. Even Hakushin Jinkuan did not know what to say even if he wanted to speak up for him. In order to make up for his mistake and also to show his attitude, Reverend Idle Month, who was furious, pulled a big net and started a round of investigation in the Kunlun party, vowing to catch the abominable murderer of the devil cult. For a moment, the Kunlun party was in a state of panic, and it was a mess. Lu Chen was a little far away from the chaotic situation, so he was not disturbed too much. Flying Goose platform was quiet enough, and Su Qingjuan's past power was enough for him to stay there. However, Lu Chen was obviously not very satisfied with this. After all, he still had his own things to do. And the most important and also the most puzzling point was, who was the murderer who killed Zhang Ji? No one in this world knew better than Lu Chen how He Changsheng died, but Zhang Ji's death really confused Lu Chen. Of course, the murderer could not be himself, but it did not seem to be the traitor of the devil cult that he had been searching for. The mysterious traitor of the devil cult had already drawn a map and set a time. No matter how he thought about it, Lu Chen felt that he could not think of a reason for the traitor to suddenly appear and kill again. During this period of time, shouldn't he be hiding more discreetly? Lu Chen had a lot of doubts in his heart, so he found a reason to go to the house where Zhang Ji lived on the same day to take a look. From the outside, the house seemed to be similar to the one He Changsheng lived in. They were both the most ordinary rooms for odd job disciples. Because of the murder case, there were disciples guarding outside the house, and ordinary people were not allowed to approach. When Lu Chen stood in the distance and looked, there was a mountain breeze blowing. Soon, He smelled a bloody smell. Lu Chen did not go near there, he only looked from afar. If it was really not that the mysterious traitor suddenly went crazy and did something big again, in fact, Lu Chen did not believe this. Then the only possibility was that there was a real devil cult elite outside that had infiltrated into Kunlun Mountain. Towards this possibility, Lu Chen's expression did not even change. But just when he was about to turn and leave, his eyes suddenly looked somewhere. Over there was a very large and dense forest. Lu Chen took a long detour and entered the forest from the other side. He then walked towards the central area of the forest with ease and came to the big rock that he saw last time. He looked around and saw that all the trees were as dense as before, the air was fresh, but other than that, there seemed to be not much other than some collapsed stone pillars and slabs. Lu Chen searched the area, but he didn't find anything suspicious. He also searched the tree bark, but he didn't find anything. Just when he thought that this new devil cult sorcerer did not seem to know the rules and did not leave any token pattern to prove his identity, Lu Chen suddenly discovered another place in the forest that was somewhat different. It was that big rock. He walked up and carefully searched for a long time. Finally, near the soil, he saw a pattern. A big tree pattern with 2 leaves and 1 flower. Please show yourself and reminisce about the past. This was the meaning that Lu Chen could see in the new devil cult pattern. Then, Lu Chen's expression turned somewhat ugly. The matter was very obvious. He had used the reincarnation formation, which was rarely circulated, to set up a formation to kill He Changsheng. This matter had simultaneously attracted the attention of the traitor of the devil cult and the other devil cult members outside Kunlun Mountain. They had even extended their hands into this place. However, Lu Chen also sensed a trace of abnormality from this strange situation. That was, the devil cult people outside of Kunlun Party did not seem to be aware of the situation of this devil cult spy in Kunlun Party. Therefore, regardless of the difficulties, risking the danger of being attacked by such a powerful and famous sect like Kunlun Party, they still wanted to show their existence, intending to make contact with that spy. This made Lu Chen very surprised. Because he clearly remembered, when true Lord Tianlan told him about this matter, he clearly and directly explained to him, that devil cult spy was a person who had received all of the devil cult's destiny. Such a person, how could the devil cult not know of him? Actually, after something had happened, they still thought of another way to guess and find him. This matter, there must be something wrong somewhere. Chapter 204. That day, after Lu Chen returned to the Flying Goose platform, he went to the edge of the cliff and looked at the vast sea of clouds and the magnificent world. He sat alone for a long time. It was not until the sky turned dark and the moon rose that the moonlight shone on his body, drawing out a lonely shadow on the ground behind him. Similarly, the moonlight shone on the depths of the Kunlun mountain range, on the 4 strange peaks between the clouds in the sky. On one of the winter peaks, snow still danced in the sky. 2 figures stood side by side on the mountain path under the moonlight. They were the headmaster of Kunlun, Reverend Idle Month, and Zhuo Xian. Reverend Idle Month did not look too good, and his expression was somewhat grim. From time to time, he would raise his head to look at the top of the winter peak. At the peak of the mountain, the howling snowstorm was wrapped into a ball. It was the cave where the legendary Hakushin Jinkun cultivated. When will Master come out to see me? Reverend Idle Month asked Zhuo Xian. Zhuo Xian looked embarrassed. Senior Martial Brother, I really can't answer you. Master's closed-door cultivation is a big matter. How can I ask how long it will take? Idle Month snorted. A trace of anxiety flashed across his face. He paced back and forth on the mountain path, looking a little upset. Zhuo Xian advised him, Senior Martial Brother, don't be too anxious. It's just Qiandang, Mingzhu, and a few others making a fuss. Can they really overturn the sky? Besides, no matter how bad the situation is, isn't Master still here? When the time comes, as long as Master appears, he will be able to intimidate everyone. I'm sure they won't dare to say another word. Idle Month nodded. It was obvious that he had the same thought in his heart. However, he quickly sighed and said, Junior Martial Brother, what you said is not without reason. However, I still feel that something is not quite right this time. I want to discuss it with Master. Moreover, you see, for the past few years, Master has always attended every sect council meeting. If you suddenly don't attend this year, coupled with those evil sect killings, I'm afraid it will cause people to gossip and deliberately sow discord between our master and disciple relationship. Shuoxian was silent. He and Reverend Idle Month had been brothers for many years. They were both disciples of Hakushin Jinkuan. Of course, he understood why Reverend Idle Month was so agitated. Back then, when the Kunlun party was deciding on the next leader, to be honest, among the Yuanying Jinren Idle Month was considered an outstanding figure, but he was not at the stage where he could look down on the others. There were at least 5 or 6 other Yuanying Jinren whose cultivation and strength were not weaker than his, and there were even 1 or 2 who were obviously better than him. But in the end, the one who became the Kunlun party's sect leader was still Idle Month. The biggest reason for this, everyone knew, was their common master, Hakushin Jinkuan. All these years, Reverend Idle Month was actually doing quite well in the position of sect leader. He was diligent and conscientious, but he could not convince the masses. There was never a lack of people who said strange things in the open and in the dark. This time, the incident of the devil cult killing people was getting bigger and bigger, and the criticism of Xianyu Jinren was getting louder and louder in the sect. It was no wonder that Xianyu Jinren was so angry and restless. In a few days' time, it would be the annual sect council meeting. Almost all the important figures in the Kunlun party would be present. At that time, it was almost expected that the evil sect killings would be brought up again. Then the doubts about Reverend Idle Month would also be raised. In front of all the important figures in the sect, of course Reverend Idle Month could not afford to lose his face. He felt that since ancient times, there had never been a sect leader of the Kunlun party who would suffer such humiliation. However, if it was like the previous years, when Hakushin Jinkun attended and sat in the Tiankun Peaks Xinyang Hall, no matter which faction of people wanted to talk nonsense, it would depend on whether they had the guts to do so or not. However, as early as a few months ago, Hakushin Jinkun had told the both of them that he might not want to attend the sect council meeting this year. Firstly, he really did not have anything important to attend. He was just there to help his disciple. Secondly, everyone felt that Reverend Idle Month had done a good job in the position of sect leader. His position was more or less stable. Therefore, he was too lazy to make the trip and simply went into closed-door cultivation. That being said, it was not wrong, but no one expected that during this period of time, the incident of the devil cult would suddenly happen, causing a storm in Kunlun sect. From top to bottom, it was restless. Those Yuanying stage Taoist masters seemed to have found an excuse to mock and ridicule Kunlun sect non-stop. Under such circumstances, Reverend Idle Month felt that it was better to invite her master to attend the sect council meeting again. Therefore, she came to the Winter Peak to ask for her master's help. However, according to Zhuoxian, Hakushin Jinkun had been in closed-door cultivation for many days. The both of them did not dare to disturb Hakushin Jinkun's quiet cultivation. They could only wait on the mountain path. However, after waiting for a long time, there was still no sign of Hakushin Jinkun coming out. Reverend Idle Month was anxious. Suddenly, she said to Zhuoxian, "Junior brother, I have many trivial matters to attend to in the sect. I am very busy and rarely come here. Could it be that now that master is in closed-door cultivation, even you can't contact him at all?" Zhuoxian smiled bitterly and said, "Senior brother, to be honest, I really can't contact master now. But if you are really anxious." He paused for a moment, then lowered his voice and said softly, "Perhaps junior sister has a way." "Little junior sister White Lotus." Reverend Idle Month was stunned. "What way does she have?" Zhuoxian said, "Master only accepted her as his last disciple when he was old. In addition, she is a rare 5-pillar talent. Naturally, he loves her deeply. Aside from instructing her wholeheartedly when he has free time, he has also handed the transcendent artifact, the Wind Speech Compass, to junior sister White Lotus. If there's an emergency, you can ask junior sister to use the wind speech compass, and perhaps you can contact master. Reverend Idlemonth was suddenly enlightened. He clapped his hands and said, "That's right. How could I forget about this? Junior brother, quickly bring me to little junior sister's cave abode. I'll ask her to contact master for me." Shuo was a little hesitant. He looked at the sky and said, "Senior brother, isn't it too late now?" Shuo looked at the night sky. Indeed, it was already late at night. However, he quickly shook his head and said, "It's urgent. Let's settle it as soon as possible. Junior brother, lead the way. I'll talk to little junior sister." Shuo nodded and said, "All right. Senior brother, follow me." The two of them walked down the mountain path again. After 15 minutes, they arrived in front of the two cave abodes. Shuo walked over and knocked on the door before shouting loudly. The stone door of the cave abode did not move at all. Shuo frowned and called a few more times, but there was still no response. Reverend Idlemonth was a little surprised. He walked over and asked, "Is it not in the cave abode?" Shuo shook his head. "It shouldn't be. It's so late. If I go out, I'll be breaking the sect rules. I'll call again. Maybe it's a little girl who is too sleepy to hear." As he spoke, he raised his hand again and knocked on the door while shouting. He did this for a while, but the cave abode was still tightly shut. There was no response. Shuo turned around and looked at Reverend Idlemonth. At that moment, both of them had a question in their minds at the same time. It's so late. Where could the little girl have gone? The moon shone brightly in the dark night, shining on Kunlun Mountain in the shadows. On the dark mountain path, a little girl was walking contentedly. For someone of her age to walk on an empty mountain path in the dark and cold night, it was very strange no matter how one looked at it. This little girl was, of course, White Lotus. Her beautiful face was calm. Looking at the direction she was walking in, it was towards Flying Goose platform. Her clothes fluttered in the night wind, and the high collar on her neck could be seen from time to time. That was to cover up some of the wounds. Although they were basically under control, the injuries that Lu Qin had inflicted on her that day had left a very strange wound on her neck. In the end, it still hadn't completely healed. However, for some reason, White Lotus did not seem to have too much hatred for the person called Lu Qin. This was somewhat unusual for her, who had been arrogant since she was young. Even she was a little surprised. Perhaps it was because although that person was cunning and vicious, she did not have to pretend in front of him. She could say whatever she wanted and do whatever she wanted. This was really very satisfying and comfortable. Oh, there was also that black dog. In fact, the blood food's secret method was not as important as she said it was. After all, she had accidentally learned it when she was young. It was not a secret method unique to her. If she really did not care about it, then she would not care about it. Anyway, she would go and bother him first. Looking at the helpless and depressed expression of the person called Lu Qin, it was still very pleasing. White Lotus thought of this in her heart. A smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She quickened her pace and walked towards Flying Goose platform. Just as she was walking, her expression suddenly stiffened and her footsteps immediately came to a halt. A trace of surprise and caution flashed across her eyes. At the same time, in a dark corner in front of her, 3 rays of green light suddenly emerged from the darkness. They were like dark green flames. They were like 3 eyeballs embedded in a strange and vicious face. A dark aura gushed out from that corner. White Lotus frowned slightly and took a step back. Then, she stared in that direction with a trace of vigilance on her face. The green flames swayed slowly and gradually approached. White Lotus quickly saw that it was a 3-eyed monster shaped like a small snake. It was baring its teeth at her, revealing its terrifying fangs. The 3 green lights were 3 strange green eyes that were growing on the head of that strange creature. Hiss 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 hiss. A strange sound came from the front. A trace of uneasiness flashed across White Lotus's heart. She stared at it with her guard up. But at this moment, she suddenly discovered something strange. The three-eyed, green-eyed strange insect was staring at her, but it did not look at her face, her eyes, her hands, or her feet. The three-eyed strange insect's eyes were staring at her neck the whole time. The neck that was wrapped by the collar and had an unhealed wound. Chapter 205. It was late at night. Lu Chen was already lying on the bed. His eyes were closed, and he looked like he was asleep. However, he seemed to wake up from his dream all of a sudden. He sat up abruptly, and a strange black flame burned in his eyes as he scanned his surroundings. When familiar things came into view one after another, Lu Chen realized that he was still in the familiar small wooden house. He sighed softly. He was in a daze for a moment. Then, he leaned against the wall and pushed open the window. A ray of moonlight that was as clear as water descended from the sky and shone on him through the window sill. Lu Chen looked at the bright moon in the sky and realized that it was rounder than yesterday. Perhaps in a few days' time, it would become round again. The moonlight on the window sill was as white as a veil. The cold wind blew past, cold and lonely. Lu Chen looked at the lonely night outside the window and suddenly thought of the figure sitting on the window sill the day before yesterday. At that time, White Lotus did not look like a vicious and mysterious person. Instead, she looked more like an innocent and cute girl. However, just as he thought of this, Lu Chen immediately shook his head and threw this dangerous thought to the back of his mind. That White Lotus was innocent and cute. There must have been many people who had this kind of thought and died in her hands. At this moment, Lu Chen's expression suddenly changed. In his eyes, a black flame burned again. Somewhere in the distance, there seemed to be a throbbing power that was very familiar. He had been searching for it for a long time. It was the strange three-eyed blood-devouring bug. Lu Chen immediately became spirited. After pondering for a moment, he pressed his hand on the window sill and floated out. Then, he took advantage of the night and blended into the darkness, flying towards the mountain path. On the winter peak, in the snowstorm, Perfected Idle Month and Zhuoxian stood at the entrance of White Lotus's cave abode and looked at each other. Immortal Idle Month could not help but ask Zhuoxian, where did she go? There's a curfew in the middle of the night. If Junior Sister is still on Kunlun Mountain and someone sees her, it'll be a crime of disrespecting the sect's rules. Zhuoxian smiled bitterly and said, Senior brother, I really don't know. Little Junior Sister is extremely intelligent and has always been personally taught by Master. I don't usually talk to her much. Taoist Master Idle Moon raised his head to look at the moonlight, and then looked at the even more beautiful spectacle of lightning under the moonlight, surrounded by the violent snowstorm. Then, he exhaled deeply, and then sighed again. Lu Chen moved forward in the darkness, heading towards the strange aura in the distance. That aura was very strange. For some reason, it actually triggered the power of the black fire that was hidden in the deepest part of his body. Lu Chen even had a faint feeling that it was the hunger of the black fire and the divine black flame board. They were like hungry and terrifying hunters, and their prey was the blood-devouring worms. As long as he could kill the blood-devouring worms, he could absorb even more terrifying aura of the undead. The dark aura was too obvious. It was like a beacon guiding Lu Chen's direction. However, when he rushed to the mountain path, even though Lu Chen had always been bold and calm, he could not help but change his expression. On the dark mountain path in front of him, there was a petite figure standing there. Her hands were raised high, and there were traces of ice and snow flowing from her fingertips. On the ground beside her, Lu Chen actually saw the corpses of several blood-devouring worms. Almost all of the blood-devouring worms were tightly wrapped in ice and snow. They looked extremely stiff. They were probably frozen to death. At this moment, White Lotus also seemed to have seen Lu Chen. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at him. Then, she suddenly laughed and said, How is it? Am I considered powerful? Lu Chen glanced at the corpses of the blood-devouring worms on the ground and could not help but smile bitterly. Then, he nodded and said, Powerful. Ha! White Lotus seemed to be happy all of a sudden. She put down her raised hands and walked towards Lu Chen. Then, she said casually, I originally wanted to go to the Flying Goose platform to find you, but I did not expect to encounter such strange things on the way. They were extremely vicious, so I simply killed them all. Admirable. Lu Chen nodded and said to White Lotus. White Lotus laughed and kept walking. At the same time, she said, Are your words sincere or not? Lu Chen thought for a while and said, Your cultivation method might just be able to restrain this kind of monster. But no matter what, it is still powerful. White Lotus laughed. At this time, she had already walked in front of Lu Chen. Then, she smiled sweetly and said, Then why are you here? Are you here to pick me up? Stop dreaming. How could I come to pick you up? Lu Chen snorted at White Lotus's words. Just as he was about to say a few more words to mock her, he suddenly saw White Lotus's body suddenly shake a few times. She closed her eyes and did not make a sound. It was as if she had suddenly become a walking corpse and fell down. Lu Chen was shocked and subconsciously reached out to hug White Lotus's body. But as soon as he touched her body, Lu Chen's expression changed greatly. It was like the roar of darkness in the night, suddenly exploding in front of him. A wave of darkness surged over and instantly wrapped around his body. This feeling was the aura of the strange three-eyed worm. It could not be wrong. Lu Chen's expression changed several times. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand and tore open Bai Lian's right sleeve with a ripping sound. Immediately, a strand of black qi appeared on her abnormally white wrist. At the same time, a twisted, protruding mark suddenly sprang up from the back of her hand. Then, it crazily rushed up, and it looked like it was about to rush past her shoulder and into her chest. Lu Chen snorted coldly. He suddenly grabbed White Lotus's shoulder with one hand and then fiercely clawed down. His 5 fingers instantly turned black. Then, black flames gushed out from his hand and directly burned into White Lotus's flesh. White Lotus lost her voice and cried out in pain. But at the same time, the black gas that was rushing up suddenly stopped. It seemed to have seen the most terrifying thing in the world. For a moment, it did not dare to rush forward. Instead, it turned around and fled. But at this time, Lu Chen grabbed White Lotus's shoulder with one hand. His other hand followed the root and directly wrapped around White Lotus's elbow. After a moment, there was a sudden scream. A strange three-eyed worm rushed out from White Lotus's wrist with its fangs and claws bared. After the strange worm broke out, White Lotus moaned and directly fell to the ground. It looked like she had fainted. And Lu Chen looked at the evil blood-sucking worm that flew into the air and seemed to want to escape. He suddenly reached out and directly grabbed the body of the blood-sucking worm in the air. The blood-sucking worm roared and turned its head. It seemed to be completely enraged. Just as it was about to attack Lu Chen, there was suddenly a deep and boundless black flame that was like an iron curtain that suddenly burned. It burned on Lu Chen's hand. It also burned on White Lotus's arm. Even from her neck, there were a few strange black lights that lit up. Under such a pincer attack, the blood-sucking worm had no way out. It was instantly burnt and melted in that raging black flame. Everything quieted down and the tranquility of the night was restored. Lu Chen stood in the same place and muttered to himself for a moment. Then he bent down and picked up all the carcasses of the blood-sucking worms. Carrying the unconscious White Lotus, he turned around and left with large strides. Lu Chen brought White Lotus back to his wooden house. In fact, he didn't really want to do this. But first of all, he really didn't know where to send this girl. Even if he knew White Lotus was a member of Kunwa City's by clan, it was the middle of the night and there was a curfew, so he naturally couldn't send her there. Everything could only wait until the sun rose tomorrow. Apart from this, Lu Chen had another reason why he couldn't give up on White Lotus. It was the sudden appearance of the strange three-eyed worm. Why did this vicious worm, known as an ancient killing weapon, suddenly besiege White Lotus? He felt that he had to get to the bottom of this matter. White Lotus's body, or the foundation of White Lotus's cultivation, was far more powerful than Lu Chen imagined. At first, Lu Chen expected White Lotus to sleep for half a day, but in fact, White Lotus only woke up after an hour. What happened? After seeing that White Lotus had woken up, Lu Chen didn't bother to inquire about her well-being and directly asked her. White Lotus also seemed very straightforward. She said, I don't know. I'm asking about those strange three-eyed worms. Why did they suddenly attack you? I don't know either. White Lotus sat up with some difficulty. Then, like how Lu Chen sat most of the time, she leaned against the wall next to the window and said, in any case, there were no signs at the beginning. Several of them suddenly rushed out and almost swallowed me alive. Lu Chen furrowed his brows, clearly a little puzzled. On the contrary, White Lotus seemed to be more at ease. Taking advantage of this rare free time, she looked at the somewhat messy little wooden hut and then looked at the night sky on the windowsill. Her face showed a trace of a gratified smile. Probably because of this quiet scenery, White Lotus's heart finally calmed down. Then, she concentrated for a moment and suddenly said, but I saw a strange phenomenon. Lu Chen's spirit was shaken. He stared at her and said, what is it? White Lotus said, just now, all those strange three-eyed worms, I don't know why, from the beginning to the end, all of them seemed to be staring at my neck, as if there was a peerless delicacy on my neck. Lu Chen's expression slightly changed. He said in a low voice, your neck. White Lotus smiled and said, it's the wound that you caused and hasn't healed yet. Why do I have a feeling that although those strange worms don't look smart, perhaps they are very interested in the thing that you cultivate with. One day, they will come for you again. White Lotus said threateningly, as if she was pronouncing a sentence to Lu Chen. Lu Chen was silent. He thought to himself, could it be that those blood-devouring worms also have an abnormal desire for the power of the black flame? He then thought of the unimaginably terrible dark power that had appeared in the depths of Kunlun during the great earthquake in Kunlun. Lu Chen stared at White Lotus and did not speak. White Lotus felt a little uncomfortable under his gaze. She frowned and asked, what are you looking at? Lu Chen sighed and said, young girl, put on your clothes first.